Okay, everybody, we're all here. This is so much fun, but it's time to start the meeting. Would you like to do the Pledge of Allegiance, Leslie?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so now we have our planning director's report.
Yeah, roll call.
Oh, roll call, details.
Commissioner. Oh, that's definitely not working. Okay.
Planning Director Jinga has just smashed the microphone.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Here.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Here.
Commissioner Lambert?
Here.
Commissioner McKinnon?
Present.
Commissioner Perry?
Here.
Chair Fresco?
Here,
We need
planning
IT
director.
guy. Thank goodness for that. I never wanted to hear from her this evening.
Good evening, Commission. Your next meeting after tonight will be August 15th, so the August 1st meeting is canceled. On the 15th, we have a alcohol CUP on Wilshire. We have a mixed-use project at 2822 Santa Monica Boulevard, which I think is the southwest corner of Santa Monica and Yale. Then on September 5th, which would be the next meeting, 1920 Oceanfront Walk and 1828 Ocean Avenue will both be before the Commission. Those are two development review permits that are housing projects. And then we will have a special meeting on September 12th. And on that night, we have 1802 Santa Monica Boulevard, which is another mixed-use project, auto dealer and housing? Or, yeah. And then the September 19th meeting will be canceled. So again, in August, the only meeting is August 15th, and then in September, it'll be September 5th and September 12th. Items coming up at the City Council. Next week, they'll be looking at the 17th Street cycle track project that the Commission saw a few months ago. And then on August 14th is the telecommunications ordinance that the Commission reviewed, again, a couple of months ago. Tomorrow night is the scoping session for the Miramar EIR, and that will be at the Ken Edwards Center from 6 to 7:30. And then also tonight I wanted to mention that there are some rotations happening in the City Attorney's Office. So Susan Cola will be transitioning out of her regular spot as the Commission attorney. We will still be working with Susan on development agreement projects like St. John's, other big projects that are coming up, and other planning projects like tonight where Susan's been involved for a long time and she'll stay involved. Heidi will be the new representative. Eben Chin will be here from the attorney's office on August 15th to introduce Heidi and to also kind of talk a little bit about the assignment. So that concludes my report.
Can you say Heidi's last name?
No.
Van Tonglin, is that right?
That was actually not a quiz, it was because I can't say it.
Yes. I wrote it down because I wasn't sure.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
Is Heidi going to stay with the Landmarks Commission too?
Yes.
Wow. Other thing, what's the timing on the R1 ordinance? Are we still looking at the end of the year?
Not to bring it back to you, we are. Sorry.
We have a IZO in place,
Right.
and that goes till November 2019. So by
we have time.
November 2019. Yeah.
Are you aware of you probably are, the legislation that would prohibit counting ADUs toward lot coverage?
Yeah.
Good.
We're ahead of the time.
I knew you would be. And then my final question is, what's going on with the review of the inclusionary requirements in the DCP? You were going to submit something to City Council and CC us, and do you remember that?
The inclusionary requirements?
The inclusionary requirements that were adopted as part of the DCP, they're in the zoning
You're
ordinance.
talking about just a report on what housing has been submitted since the adoption.
Since then, right.
We're working on just a summary. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward report. There haven't been any projects that have been filed that would be subject to the 30% requirement. So that's information we are planning to get back to council. We're not sure if it's an information item or some kind of report back to council, but we are just putting the numbers together.
Yeah, I'm assuming nothing will happen before November. So.
Right.
So I would like to follow up the question about the city attorney, and I'm not sure whether it goes to you, Mr. Martin, or to Ms. Kohler. So in the past with one attorney, there was a very clear person that you went to and asked a question as a commissioner about issues coming before us. Are there now a team of attorneys, or is Heidi going to work for us? How's this going to work?
She will be permanently staffing both the planning department and the commission. I mean, there are other attorneys who are assigned, for example, to transportation, but she will be doing the zoning matters, and she will be staffing planning commission. So she should be your chief contact.
I see. Thank you.
And also, as I mentioned, Eben Shen will be here on the 15th, so we could also ask those kind of questions of him.
Any other questions? No? Just to remind you all to use your speaker button so that I know if you want to speak. And are there any planning commissioner announcements? No? So then we have approval of minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes here. And I, for one, have notes. I did not read them far enough in advance of this meeting to give Kyle my typographical error list in advance like I would normally do. But I would like to suggest there's one substantive thing in each set that I have. Do we want to do one at a time, or should we do both? One at a time. Okay, so we'll look at 6A first, which is September 6, 2017. And on page 9, in the last paragraph, there's a sentence that says, Chair Fresco said the fence at the setback line will set this property apart from its neighbors. I'm not actually sure what that is supposed to say, so I couldn't correct it. I'm just not sure. So I'm afraid staff will have to look and see what they were trying to translate that got miswritten that way. I don't think I said that. I'm just not sure what it says. So that's my note for that one. And then the tiny errors are just like commas and spelling and typos. Anybody? Well, I'll just move on to the other one. Oh, Jennifer, do you have a thing? Okay.
But we'll approve 6A some other time when it gets corrected, or?
I think we might have to approve it tonight. Maybe we can just delete that line. And then, then maybe somebody can move approval with that line deleted and the typos fixed.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Moving on to the second one.
Chair, I'll abstain.
Okay.
I don't know if it was the digital format that I was working with, but I just missed entirely the fact that there were minutes to review.
I'm sorry.
Digital format.
This one is a little more complicated. My note on this one is on page 4. And in the last paragraph, the reason I brought the HRI stuff up again and the historic character of downtown was to say, I really wanted to say specifically that I had noted that the downtown plan said that we're supposed to protect remaining historic character and historic fabric as a direction in the plan, and that was reiterated and discussed at great length. And then I went to ARB where projects were approved where they were cladding over the original fabric of buildings with plastic and saying it had to happen, and they were getting approved, which was in direct conflict with that. So that was the reason why I brought it up the second time, which is in that last paragraph. So, and then I had a lot of typos. So, Jennifer?
In my review of the minutes of June 6th, my recollection of what the others have said, that as reflected in the minutes, seem pretty accurate, but I won't speak for the others. But in speaking for myself, I feel like these minutes don't in any way delineate the comments that I made that evening, not even partially. I don't know if it was an accident and that part of the meeting was skipped, but after that meeting, I received numerous comments from the public about comments from all of us, including some that I made, but they're not reflected in these minutes at all. So I'm going to vote no, but if there's a way to postpone them until they can come back, aside from reading off my numerous bulleted notes back into the record here now, I feel like maybe they could get a second pass. But I feel that it's a disservice to the public because I didn't simply comment on suggested changes. I commented with suggested enhancements and changes pursuant to the downtown visioning process that began and our charge for the evening. So I, with specific comments and overall broader suggestions for ways to enhance the attractiveness of the downtown area that we were focusing on. So I hope the rest of the commission will agree with me. Otherwise, I'll vote no. Thanks.
All right. So does anyone want to make a motion?
I would move to postpone based on this input.
Okay. We don't have to move that, though, right? No. All right. So we will continue 6B, which are the minutes from June 6, 2018.
Thank you, Chair.
And those comments were on the downtown item in particular, but the other item is complete for
That's
you?
correct, yes.
Okay.
You should take a voice vote on the motion to continue.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, so that's unanimous. So now we have a public hearing on the Local Coastal Land Use Plan, or LUP. And are there, I guess we don't have public disclosure, so it's staff who is already there getting it ready.
Now it's on. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Liz Barrell. I'm Senior Planner and the Project Manager for the LCP. And before I get started this evening, I'd like to introduce the rest of the team with us tonight. Carrie Fukui, who has been working on the project with me for the last 2.5 years, Roxanne Tanamori, and with us we have from DUDEC, Melissa Ochter, and she is available for any of the questions that you have, and particularly the sea level rise and environmental quality perhaps too. I'm very, very excited to be bringing this to you tonight because this recommendation hearing is a significant milestone for the city of Santa Monica. A hearing like this was last held more than a quarter century ago and during very different times. In March, when you held a study session to discuss the previous draft of the plan, we had excellent and positive feedback. And the final draft before you tonight reflects the community input and your input, and as well as further resolution of most of the outstanding issues with the Coastal Commission staff with whom we have been meeting for the last 2.5 years. So I'm going to do just some quick review of some of what I presented at the study session for the benefit of those who may need a little background before going through the key changes to the final draft that's before you tonight. The timeline that's up on the screen illustrates in a nutshell the 2.5 years of outreach, development, and review that's been completed for this project and has brought us to tonight's hearing. The final draft was posted on the project website on July 3rd, and notification was sent to our department list of several hundred interested community members, in addition to the newspaper notice, and the city's communications division has also included notice of tonight's release in some of its recent SAMO News emails as well. Santa Monica is updating its LCP in compliance with state law. Our goal is to complete the full LCP scope and transfer Coastal Development Permit Review Authority from the Coastal Commission to the city, with the exception of the most sensitive coastline areas, which are called original jurisdiction, and remain in the Commission's purview per the Coastal Act. The land use plan format today differs from 1992 when the last LUP was certified, and the level of detail expected by the Coastal Commission is much higher. In order to guide CDP processing over the period following LUP certification and prior to the certification of an implementation plan, it was very important to us that the LUP planning effort focus on ensuring consistency with city policies, including the LUCE and the Sustainable City Plan. It was important to us to make sure that the coastal zone development would continue to be treated the same as the rest of the city in terms of requirements such as stormwater retention or rainwater capture, and parking for cars and for bicycles, and to avoid situations in which a development approved by the city might be rejected by the Coastal Commission based on conflicting standards. So this map before you is the map of the coastal zone. It extends the length of the city, and it's from the ocean to 4th Street and then south of Pico to Lincoln Boulevard. The map defines the 8 sub-areas as well that are in the LCP. The most sensitive sub-areas, as you can see, sub-areas 1, which is divided into A, B, and C, and sub-area 2, which is the pier. And what you can see on this map is that these 2 sub-areas, which are west of the first public road, which is the red line in the map, are the areas of greatest sensitivity and include the area of original jurisdiction. The policies of the LUP are divided into 7 sections as listed on the slide. These are the same policy areas that were covered in 1992 with the addition of sea level rise policies that are now mandated to be included in order to plan for adaptation and resilience in the face of global climate change and rising sea levels. You reviewed the policies in March at the study session, and my presentation tonight is going to focus on the changes to the public draft and from the public draft to the final draft that is before you tonight for recommendation to council. The staff report includes a table beginning on page 4 that outlines the final draft changes. It also explains why some of the Commission's suggestions weren't included in the final draft. Revisions that were made on this, based on this discussion, have enhanced the document by providing some more relevant background information, introducing an additional scenic view corridor along Oceanfront Walk, and which I will discuss in a bit. And as you see before you, the changes that have been made. So during the public review period, we received some great feedback and some specific suggestions that have made it into the final draft LUP and made it, as I said, a better document. We thank the Planning Commission and members of the community and city boards and commissions that reviewed the draft LUP and those that weighed in on items of particular importance to them. The staff report highlights the key substantive changes that were made, and I'll review some of these now, beginning with the access policies. So the little symbols on the left show where the comment came from. So in terms of the access policies, these changes resulted from a number of sources, mostly from Planning Commission, from the Coastal Commission, as you see one policy, SMS, that stands for us, Santa Monica staff. So policy 20, for example, reflects more staff review of integrating the DCP into the LUP. Other changes, such as number 20 and 21, that came from the Coastal Commission staff review, and the coastal trail policy resulted from staff's investigation of the Commission's request that we add another view corridor. And although it wasn't added as a view corridor, the important points of view towards the Palisades Bluff were included in Policy 21 in the California Coastal Trail, which is the same as the bike path. The small changes to recreation and visitor serving uses resulted from Coastal Commission comments, Coastal Commission staff comments, to clarify temporary events with an eye towards ensuring that temporary events on the beach do not interfere with the public's ability to access the beach and ocean. Some requests by Coastal Commission staff were not agreed to in this policy section, and we continue to discuss with them why the city cannot accept short-term vacation rental in any part of the coastal zone. We are also continuing to question the legal basis for their proposed requirement that all new hotels provide 25% of rooms at rates that would be considered low-cost visitor accommodation, or alternatively pay an in lieu fee. So those are two policies still outstanding and changes that were not made in the final draft before you. The sea level rise policy changes, as you can see on the side there, were all made in response to Coastal Commission comments. The changes generally clarify, as we're working through new policies together to ensure that they're understandable and consistent with Coastal Commission guidelines, which are a bit of a moving target over the last 2 years because this is such a rapidly developing subject. So some of the small refinements of the policies that you see before us here are a result of that ongoing conversation. The environmental quality policies also, as you see, responded to Coastal Commission comments. In general, to refine wording to ensure that the policies are protective of ESHA and clearly defined. There's also some clarification to accommodate the unique way that the city defines and reviews development applications for rainwater capture, a special definition that goes with those policies in order to ensure consistency was limited, as you can see, to apply to policies 105 to 114, which specifically are related to that. And there was a concern that the definition otherwise expanded beyond what it was intended to do. So that was a clarification we worked through, again, with the Coastal Commission. The next is scenic resources policies, and here the pub is the public. So we had public comments as well as the Planning Commission, both interested in exploring the Oceanfront Walk scenic corridor. And so that was analyzed by staff and determined to be a potential additional scenic corridor, and so it is now proposed within the final draft. So while scenic views of the surrounding natural features in Santa Monica and beyond may be seen from many points along the beach, Oceanfront Walk was found to have a unique pedestrian-focused view, particularly because it provides a promenade for pedestrians to become immersed in the environment of Santa Monica Beach. The view corridor was added to the final draft, noting the significance of views towards the coastline, the pier, and the mountains, and specifically, and that's there under what to preserve. And the addition is on page 79 in chapter 3. So this is not in the policy chapter, but one change in the policy chapter related to scenic view corridors is policy number 143. So most view corridors and vantage points rely on views across public rights of way. That the way that they're structured, the important views are looking down streets or looking across the beach or over Palisades Park. And while analyzing this corridor that was added and reviewing others, some concerns were brought forward that there may be situations in which the city would need to provide a facility to meet public health and safety needs that may fall within the scenic view. So the city, of course, takes great care to design projects with sensitivity to views and cultural resources and high-level urban design to be visually compatible. But staff is proposing some language in this policy that ensures that projects that are required for public health and safety are accommodated within the view corridors. So in response to some public comments that you received on this matter prior to the hearing, we wanted to assure you the intent is not that this is a carte blanche to put public work projects in the way of scenic views, but simply to ensure that they can be accommodated. And of course, every project, when it comes forward for a CDP, will be evaluated and looked at on an individual basis. So in the cultural and historic resources policy section, there were no changes from the previous draft. And that brings us to new development. The new development policies, as you can see, the changes resulted from suggestions that came from the DC as the Disabilities Commission, the RPC, the Recreation and Parks Commission, as well as the public and the Coastal Commission. And in general, the changes were to ensure language that that would ensure that the interests of these particular commissions was taken into account. For example, the Disabilities Commission request to include universal design, and the Recreation and Parks Commission request to include language about adequate recreational facilities, not just in the Ocean Park sub-area, but also in the North Side residential, and also in downtown, which is consistent with the DCP. And the chart, which isn't all that readable on the screen right now, a few changes were made, and including in the supplemental staff report, there's some additional, one last change that was made on this chart to include all of the sub-areas of the DCP as well. I'll get to the supplemental in a moment. The public draft proposed definitions format that would maintain future consistency with other city policy items by putting it in an appendix. However, the cross-references were not acceptable to the Coastal Commission staff, and we've gone round and round on this, and the city has agreed to just move them into the definitions chapter. So the primary concerns that they had were non-conforming and demolition definitions. So these definitions are consistent with city definitions. The concern is in future, should those definitions change elsewhere, they would need to be changed in the LCP. So that is just sort of a fact of Coastal Act life, and we'll have to make sure we deal with that. In the supplemental staff report, so yesterday afternoon you received a supplemental staff report that corrected just a few items that were brought to staff's attention following release of the final draft. Staff agreed that these changes were important clarifications and corrections of descriptions that might not be read in the way in which they had been intended. We realize there will probably be more refinement as we approach the council hearing, and these items, as well as other good points that will undoubtedly come up tonight or in the next couple of weeks, will be provided as an addendum to the draft for the council for adoption. So the next incorporation of changes and the reposting and reprinting of the LUP will occur after the adoption when we're preparing the document to be sent to the Coastal Commission. So with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council adopt the local coastal program land use plan as presented tonight, which includes the supplemental staff report. And before we get on to our discussion, I just thought I would end with a reminder of why the Coastal Act is actually a very good thing and important for the state of California, that we're protecting our beaches and protecting our environment. And that is our snowy plover, our one and only endangered species mentioned in our coastal program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think because of the way the questions go with this kind of intense document, maybe we should hear from the public and then do questions. Is that amenable to everyone? Okay. So we have, I'll call three at a time, Ken Kutcher, Thomas Nitti, and Carol Lemline.
Good evening, Commissioners. Ken Kutcher here on behalf of Marty Mink and 5 other families that own the property directly beneath the pier. It's a landmark parcel. They have Big Dean's and Sea Mist among their tenants, local visitor serving uses. I submitted a letter yesterday, it was referenced during Liz's remarks, raising 3 points for the Commission. I'd like to mention what those 3 are and then focus on one of them. One is that the LUP should more clearly reserve, if not encourage, opportunities to replace the parking that's currently on the pier with other better visitor serving uses. The second, which Liz touched on, was a concern about public works projects not being exempt from impacts to scenic corridors and public views. And I appreciate the clarification with respect to that. And the third is an acknowledgement that Carousel Park may become a designated city landmark. There is an application that's pending and has been deferred till September for a decision. I'm going to focus the rest of my time on the first point, which is the parking on the pier. This commission has been an ardent advocate for strategies to get people out of their vehicles and using other modes of transportation. In particular, the Commission has looked at strategies for reducing parking demand and building less parking in areas served by multimodal forms of transportation. The pier is a prime candidate, I think, for this Commission to implement such strategies, particularly in light of the major infrastructure improvement of the light rail line that leads directly down to the pier. And it's a shame, frankly, that the pier has such a large chunk of this scarce resource devoted to automobile parking instead of other visitor-serving uses, such as retail, restaurant, cultural, educational, civic-related uses. Going as far back as March of 1988, the City Council adopted a pier development program that endorsed specifically removal of parking from the pier as a important objective. And here we are 30 years later, and we still have parking on the pier. Tonight is not about whether to remove it, but really to make sure that it's clear that that's an opportunity that should be explored in the future. We think that that would be appropriate for this commission to endorse. It's certainly a position that the Landmarks Commission, the pier being a designated landmark, has similarly endorsed in hearings on the LUP and in their comments to this commission. So while the commission isn't in a position tonight to make a recommendation about whether or not it's appropriate to do so, we'd encourage that. Thank you.
A question for you.
So you're not proposing that that language actually be included in the LUP, or are you?
I am. I suggested some language to the commission. It's a soft recommendation, meaning it doesn't mandate removal. We're trying to encourage that it be explored. The specific language I'd like to propose is the city shall explore opportunities for converting the existing pier parking to visitor serving uses in conjunction with ensuring that the pier continue to be served by automobile parking, which is already in condition number, or policy number 18.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Remember to use your speaker button so
I'm
that
sorry.
you don't jump ahead of
I'm the-
your friends. Okay, Richard.
I use my speaker button. It's the first time in history I want something. So, Mr. Kutcher, I am in strong agreement that we should remove parking from the pier, and I do find it difficult to be in such strong agreement with you, given my strong disagreement with you over the post office situation that you were here arguing.
You've never
But-
brought that up before.
No, but the strength of our agreement, however, notwithstanding, it's been pointed out to us that the Coastal Commission might not want parking to leave an area like the pier. How would we, or how do you see us as a city dealing with that?
Well, I haven't had the direct discussion with the Coastal Commission itself. I have had conversations with the Coastal Commission staff, and I'm also aware of the letters, 2 letters that the Coastal Commission has authored in March of this year that both addressed opportunities. It didn't say parking should be removed, but it clearly opened the door to the idea that parking on the pier could be changed to other visitor serving uses as long as there's other parking in the vicinity. And I think that the appendix to the LUP clearly demonstrates that there is ample parking in that vicinity, and that many, many visitors do not even use, whether it's parking on the pier or parking in that vicinity, they have other ways to get there.
That area underneath the pier is quite shockingly ugly at the moment, and I understand there has to be connection from the pier. Do your clients have a view about what should or should not occur to clean up the area and make it more beautiful, in fact make the beach distinctly better as a result of this
I think
process?
my clients would strongly endorse anything that can be done to improve the appearance underneath the pier and the connections there. I certainly think that needs attention. My clients are investing a ton of money into their own buildings at this very moment. Several are under construction at the moment, and they would strongly endorse that and see eye to eye with you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas Nitty and Carol Lemline and Roseanne Lair.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Thomas Nitty. I'm here representing the poor and middle class who are not welcome to stay overnight in our community. When have we heard the mantra in the staff report, we're protecting housing for our own residents? Yeah, we heard that a lot in the 1900s through the 1950s. Today, it's keep the low-income and middle-income visitors out of our neighborhoods. In a city with the highest hotel rates in this state, the ban on short-term rentals along the coast is not only elitist, it's racist. The Coastal Commission wants opportunity for all people. Short-term rentals are less expensive than hotels for these people. The City Council shuts the city's door to the poor. The LCP will not be approved by the Coastal Commission with a ban on short-term rentals in place. There is an answer. Short-term rentals on the coast can exist with reasonable regulation by the city rather than an outright ban. And if you think home sharing is the solution, home sharing provides no room for families who want to visit. They simply can't all crowd into somebody's bedroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, there's a question for you.
Yes.
So you suggested that there were reasonable regulations for the city to regulate short-term rentals. Can
Yes.
you elaborate what those reasonable regulations might be?
Well, the Coastal Commission has prepared a package of regulations, samples that have been used in cities all up and down the coast. This package of regulations is available on the Coastal Commission's website, and many of these regulations have been adopted by cities in collaboration with the Coastal Commission all up and down the coast. Regulations as to how often a particular unit can be rented for over the course of the year might be one of them, or how often over the course of a month, or how many are allowed in certain neighborhoods. But there's all kinds of great suggestions from the Coastal Commission that I think the city should consider.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yeah, Jason?
Mr. Nitty, I'm sorry, I have another follow-up question for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you said that you
Certainly.
You said that you were here representing low and moderate income visitors.
I don't see anybody speaking for them.
So I just wanted to get clarification.
Oh,
You're-
I'm sorry, this is supposed to be turned off. I apologize. Jaws, it's the coast. Well, I'll just put it in.
How
That's why-
appropriate.
Yeah, we can have some theme music.
Sorry about
too.
that. Okay. It's still going.
Now I have to think of a scarier question to ask him.
There we go. Okay, Paul, I apologize. Okay.
That's okay. So, are you here on behalf of a particular client tonight?
No, I'm not. I'm here on behalf of people that have brought this to my attention, and I wanted to express to this commission their concerns.
And are those people?
None of them have paid me for being here. No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carol Lemline, Ruth Ann Lair, Paul Lommer.
Yes. Chair Fresco, Vice Chair Fonda Bernardi, and Commissioners, I'm here on behalf of the Santa Monica Conservancy, and we thank you for the opportunity to comment again on this document before it goes to Council. First, we'd like to correct the description of Carousel Park on page 24, which refers to it as a small children's play area. That is just one component of a cluster of design features at the east end of the pier, linking the pier deck and the Hippodrome with Oceanfront Walk. These include a ramp for wheelchairs and bicycles, an example of universal design which predated the ADA by several years, as well as a variety of seating areas in different configurations and pavilions on the deck shaped like the former Hippodrome towers. It was designed by the noted architectural firm Moore, Rubel, and Udell, and Campbell & Campbell landscape designers, and won regional and state awards after its completion in 1986. It has been, as Mr. Kuchar mentioned, it's been nominated for designation as a landmark by 3 partners, one of which is the Cultural Landscape Foundation, the National Cultural Landscape Foundation. In addition, we are concerned about the descriptions of the Pier Bridge Replacement Project and the proposed 2-bridge plan with a new vehicle bridge from Moss Avenue. This second bridge has many undesirable impacts on historic resources, and the final EIR has not been issued. Some of the components mentioned in this text, for instance, an elevator and escalator on the pier deck, have many negative impacts on the historic pier and on the Louvre Hippodrome, which is a National Historic Landmark. We suggest revising this text to state that the bridge replacement project is being studied and leave it at that. This important public works project is something that Planning Commission may wish to review and comment on as well. In addition, this description of the Civic Center totally fails to mention the potential revitalization of the landmark Civic Auditorium, a long-standing part of the Civic Center specific plan. Details are provided on the Early Education Center and the recently approved sports field. A key objective of the specific plan is to maintain the Civic Auditorium as a prominent landmark and within the Civic Center and program it with activities that will sustain its meaningful role within the community and for visitors as well. A response to the RFP for revitalization of the Civic was received earlier this year, and while...
Thank you.
What were you going to
I was
talk
just
about?
going to say that the Civic Auditorium should certainly be part of this section. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, wait, did you have any other thoughts beyond that? want
Ruth
to
Ann
listen?
will continue on.
Oh, how lucky that she's just following you then.
So we're a tandem team. I'm part two of our comments. I wanted just a small suggestion on the cultural resource section, page 88. It gives a number, 87 designated landmarks, and as this is a list that grows with ongoing identification and designation, it seems worth to mention that this is a number that may change. A puzzle that we had in the policy section, goal 1 on page 94, the use of the word artificial, we didn't really understand. Protect, maintain, and where feasible, enhance and restore the overall quality of the coastal zone environment and its natural and artificial resources. So we're not really sure what artificial is meaning here. Is it the built environment? We're hoping it means cultural and historic resources. That's our suggestion. Finally, on policy 143, which Liz gave some clarification to, we're still troubled by its inclusion in this section on scenic and visual resources policies. The text here is really very clear, very excellent in terms of requiring design and siting to be visually compatible with the character of the surrounding area, to restore and enhance visual quality in visually degraded areas, and to protect public views to the coast and scenic coastal areas. The new phrase, provided that public works projects required for public health and safety shall be accommodated, is puzzling. We don't understand what's necessary to say that, unless it's meant to give higher priority, overweighing some of the other considerations in this section. The other troubling thing is what defines a necessary public works project. That seems subject to interpretation. It could be a major desalinization plant on the coast. It could be a 6-lane highway replacing the pier bridge. And so that's a problem that we see. And so we would like to see this just simply removed from that section. So that's our comments. I thank you very much for all of your good work and your hard work and staff's work too. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy, do you have a question?
Yeah, Ruth Ann, I have a question. So short of removing, on this last comment that you have about the public works, short of removing it, do you think that there's any kind of language that would sufficiently narrow it?
I don't know why you need to say that. I mean, public health and safety projects occur all the time in the city. So I don't know why it's necessary to have a specific inclusion in this section at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Paula Larmore and then Jerry Rubin.
Paula Larmore with Harding, Larmore, Kutcher, and Kosel. First, I want to thank city staff and this commission for all your work on the LUP thus far. It is really important to move forward this document, given that the current LUP was last certified, partially certified in 1992. So it does not reflect the city's land use plan that was adopted in 2010, amended in 2015 with the zoning ordinance adoption, or the policies in the 2017 downtown community plan. Since this document is mostly incorporating a lot of those policies and development standards, a lot of my review has been just making sure it's consistent between the two documents, and I really appreciate staff's openness to looking at those potential consistency issues. At this time, I only have 2 remaining comments on the draft. These are in addition to my partner, Ken Kutcher's comments. First is a language clarification pertaining to the right to rebuild existing buildings, which are legal nonconforming, and that's most of our existing buildings in the coastal zone. So on those sites that are in designated hazard zones, city staff proposed language that allows for their rebuild in the event of casualty loss, fire, earthquake, unless the sea level rise policies are triggered. I'm requesting a slight modification to clarify that the buildings could be rebuilt subject to compliance with the sea level rise policies. I'm concerned that as it's currently drafted, it could be interpreted to say, if those policies are triggered, you can't rebuild at all. So just asking that one clarification. The second request is to add policy language that explains the basis for the established large sites overlay. The Coastal Commission made this comment in their March letter, and this comment actually doesn't come from our firm, but from an attorney that we work with who appears before the Coastal Commission frequently. And he isn't as familiar with the downtown community plan as everyone in this room. And so it was really nice to have a fresh set of eyes looking at this. And he commented that the development standards for the ELS overlay kind of come out of the blue. There's not a lot of explanation about their basis. And I think there is some really good explanation for why those two sites in the coastal zone are designated, and they have landmark buildings on them. They have the potential for significant open space and other community benefits, and it would just be helpful to have a little bit more background about the reason that those sites are in the ELS overlay as opposed to others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mario, Paula? Mario, sorry. Somebody.
So you sent us a letter regarding some other considerations in the past, and one of the considerations you asked, is, if I understand your letter correctly, is regarding Proposition S. Do you feel that the Proposition S issues are compatible with the current plan, or are there still potential conflicts there?
So the LUP is consistent with Proposition S. That was a major issue. My understanding is that was a major issue of why the current LUP was never certified. My understanding in speaking with our city staff is that that appears to no longer be an issue with coastal staff, notwithstanding that our city staff has added more language in the current draft of the LUP that just explains, despite Prop S, we have, I'm not going to say the wrong numbers, but 700 or 900, a good stock of hotel rooms in that area. And they've kind of beefed up that language. So I'm hopeful that that will be acceptable to the Coastal Commission. I don't think anyone's proposing to undo Prop S at this time. It's more just explaining why, despite Prop S, we've been able to allow for visitor serving uses and have a lot of hotels in this area.
Okay, thank you.
Richard?
So let's go to the large sites issue. Do you feel that as it's written, this precludes large site development, or as it's written, it means that you'd have to go back to coastal for approval if the two large sites got approval from us and the City Council? What exactly is the issue in your mind that requires us to rewrite it and change it?
I don't think it's requiring it. I'm not suggesting that. I think as it's written, it sets the standard, the 130 feet, the 3.0 and the 4.0 FAR. I just think that reading this document in a vacuum, which Coastal Commission will likely do as they did not review and approve our downtown plan, there's no explanation for those. And the comments that we've received is it might be good to have a policy basis in this document self-contained explaining why the council decided to grant the extra height for those two particular sites and not for other sites.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry Rubin?
Thank you very, very much, Chair Fresco and Commissioners, City staff. I thank City staff for this comprehensive report. A couple of things. I agree with Ken Kutcher. I think we need a stronger statement, actually, about getting parking off the pier. It's an environmental disaster. Oil leaks, fumes. I think it makes it harder to get to the pier when there's issues of safety with cars coming down there. I'm surprised it hasn't been off years ago. I also agree with Carol Lemline about the Civic Auditorium. We have a darn important responsibility to save the Civic Auditorium for educational purposes, cultural purposes, art for all ages. And that has to be in there. It's just too important. I also agree with Tom Nitty. I think there is a reasonable wording of something for short-term rentals in that area that you could come up with a win-win thing that'll make that available. So I do agree with Tom Nitty. And naturally, there has to be something in there about our urban forest there. That's not blocking anyone's view. That's only helping in every way, and we need to be doing more to enhance our urban forest down by the beach. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. And that, my friends, concludes the public hearing. So how about some questions of staff? Do we have any? Okay, Richard goes first.
Absolutely.
I'm really getting the hang of this pushing the button thing. I think, first of all, there's what an extraordinary amount of work you and everybody has put in, and the comprehensiveness of your responses and the depth that you've analysed stuff and gone forward is remarkable. Congratulations to you and to the team. And I'm sure everybody here shares that, and you'll hear that as the evening wears on. So it really is a knockout, so thank you very much. Having said that, there are some issues that you've identified in your report to us and that other people have identified that bear, I think, closer examination. And in a couple of places, you've identified that the Coastal Commission staff, and by implication, perhaps the Coastal Commission and the city are, it seems, far apart. Parking would be one. And my question to you is, if you are not going to proceed in a policy direction which meets their request, how do you intend to get the plan adopted by the Coastal Commission?
So it's a good question, and thank you also very much for the compliment. While they are large issues that we're still grappling with, and we do have some upcoming meetings with Coastal Commission staff at various levels, and we hope to actually work through many of these. At the end of the day, the City Council will adopt a coastal plan, a coastal program land use plan that they're comfortable with, that they can stand behind those policies, and we will bring it to the Coastal Commission. We hope that the information that we've been providing to them, and which includes a recently released a memo that we prepared for them to explain the city's mobility policies and why the city's mobility policies and parking policies make sense in the larger context of all development going on and the environment and congestion and all of that. And we're making our very best arguments to them and hope that they will actually see through to supporting the DCP parking policies, for one thing. That's one of the items. And they have not yet said that they don't. They've just said they're withholding their judgment on it because they didn't understand where we were coming from in removing parking minimums. So that's one of them. In terms of short-term vacation, we're going to see what happens with that one and with the other recreation issue and the parking pricing issue. Though those are really the four issues that we're still talking with them about. If in the end there's disagreement, the process is that the adopted LUP would go to the Commission for Certification. Their staff will make recommendations and they will make a decision. What they do very typically is they redline various parts of it and they certify it with their changes. It goes back to our council, and the council has to decide, can we live with those changes? And the process in which they gave us a grant, worked with us, had regular meetings, is supposed to make that process, for one, go much more quickly, and two, have fewer of those areas of disagreement. So, I can't predict exactly how it's going to end, but we've been trying really hard to make it, to come as close as possible to agreements.
And if we don't and shouldn't back away from our parking policies, and the Coastal Commission continues its fascination with the car as the predominant way of people getting to the beach, what happens? Our certification fails. Well, let's say it does fail. What then happens?
Well, I do want to point out we have a lot of mobility policies in here that they have agreed to.
No, I totally understand that. I'm actually not going to that. I'm just trying to understand if they remain stubborn and don't see the benefits of where we've got to and don't agree with the plan, what then?
Well, the reason I don't want to answer the question as phrased is because they haven't remained stubborn. They actually have not, right? Like many of the policies that we have talked about, which are in here, they've accepted. It's really come down to two very specific things, that they want to maintain control over parking pricing, and parking pricing is a very important tool that we have for monitoring the use and keeping things flowing. And the other one, of course, is the DCP, which, as I said, they have not yet said they disagree. But given the past, we're concerned that they might take that out of the policy. If they do, that'll be a very big deal. Let's hope that our conversations get to a yes before we have to answer that.
Okay. So I'm defer to other people's questions, and we might come back to some more later on. Thank you.
Leslie.
Hi, I have a couple. I was actually more organized than usual. The first, and it's really a clarification point. I wanted to make it clear that when we talk about the coastal zone, it's the west side of 4th Street, correct?
It's the map, if you want me to put
right,
the
but what it
slide
shows
again.
4th Street, but just one side. It's not the east side of 4th Street.
Oh, I see. Actually, it's the right-of-way of 4th Street and west. So
Okay,
it includes
so-
up to the sidewalk, but not the development on the east
Understand.
side.
So the only reason we have
Yeah.
2 established large sites in here is because 5th and Arizona is not in the coastal zone,
Right.
correct? Okay.
That's right.
All
Mhm.
right.
And by the way, just since it was brought up, I do want to point out that on page 31 in the coastal zone, chapter 2, there is a discussion of the ELS sites. So that's the background for the policy.
Speaking of that, I mean, can you see any downside to saying okay to their wanting a policy on ELSs? I mean, what's the downside? Why not just do it? Give them a
I
point.
think
you know.
in what we've learned in our 2.5 years, first of all, less is sometimes more.
But they asked
right?
for it.
We don't need. Well, also the language they propose, it's not really policy language. It's a statement. It's a description.
Maybe you need
And
more
we don't
description
typically
than-
have policies that is just a description of something.
Right.
That's more background. It could be put into the background section. We didn't think it was necessary because there already is language in the background section,
Okay.
and that's why we're not
And they're
recommending
okay
it.
with that. The other question is one that is recurring for me, and that's the whole idea of low-cost accommodations. We haven't updated our room rates in I don't know how many years, right? I don't know. It's said that it's been a long time coming, and sometime it will happen soon, whatever. And I think we now set it at $200 a night.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I read that somewhere. And
Yeah.
of all the hotels and motels you listed on here, only 3 of them in the coastal zone are in that category. 2 of them aren't going anywhere, because one is a youth hostel and the other's in a Measure S area, unless you can replace hotels with Measure S. I don't know if you can or not. So basically, we've got no low-cost motels that we're looking at losing. So it's kind of all means nothing. I mean, our replacement requirements, since there are only 3 of them, really isn't going to be triggered.
Right.
So that brings us to the idea that in a new hotel, you have to set aside rooms. And that's the Coastal Commission's position, correct? And so my question
That's a
is,
proposal.
do we do the development agreement before they get a CDP?
Yes.
Okay. So if in our development agreement, we don't account for affordable rooms in a hotel, and it goes to the Coastal Commission, is it a possibility they will overturn that and say, yes, you have to have 25% of the rooms that are affordable?
Is it a possibility that they could add that as a condition to a CDP? Yes, it is
Yes.
a possibility. It's a stronger possibility if our LCP actually requires it, and we are very concerned about the legality of it and don't want to be the holders of the document with that
Well, I understand
requirement.
legality from the standpoint of a nexus study and sort of requiring that as a community benefit. But my understanding is if it's part of a development agreement, you could basically ask for anything. So in a development agreement, you could
Yes.
ask for a set aside of affordable units. And it'd be okay. If they agreed to it, you're fine, right?
Theoretically.
And the only
I don't know
hotels
if
we're
Jane
looking at
or
right now are
Susan want to
development
answer.
agreement
Yes,
hotels.
in theory, yes. Obviously, if an applicant, a development agreement is effectively a contract negotiation,
I understand.
right? So
If they agree.
if they agree to it, sure, but I think that we've laid out in prior discussions our staff concerns. 2 things, one is the legality of such a provision, and we're not talking about, just keep in mind, not just development agreements. We have people who have expressed interest in, this is language that would be broadly applicable to non-development agreement projects. That is actually where the crux of our concern lies, is how you impose that kind of requirement.
I
And then
understand.
secondly, really the practicality of effectively, you're talking about deed restricted hotel rooms, and I think we understand the challenges and the massive program we have in administering, our
Well, I think
deed
administration is a
restricted
different
units.
issue. I mean, in terms of like tagging people based on their income, that is never going to happen.
Well,
and it's
I
probably
think
not
it's
legal
just the
anyway.
practicality of how do you monitor these rooms? We still don't have a formula from the Coastal Commission as to what is, how they came up with 25% and how you calculate what, what those, what the in lieu fees should be. There are some varying formulas that have been used in the past, but, there isn't one that is like actually set.
Well, here's
so
something
there's a lot of-
interesting, and I sound like Nina now. I researched Coastal Commission workshops, and I found one on October 26, 2016. And the whole workshop was devoted to how do you define low-cost housing accommodations in hotels.
Right.
It's
Familiar with
exhaustive,
that.
and there's a methodology they actually lay forward. So it's not like they don't do it themselves.
No,
but
they-
they
no,
put
it's-
something forward for you to consider.
This was the Robinson.
The Robinson
It's the
methodology.
distinction
methodology.
between
Yeah.
defining what it is and then how you arrive at a in lieu fee, I
Right.
think is.
And
Well, it's
actually
also a
what we-
25% inclusionary requirement that they're imposing, which is a little different than what the workshop discussed. And also, there is no regulation that they've adopted, so this is a workshop, but there's nothing legally requiring this. And there is language in the Coastal Act which talks about feasibility, so it raises a lot of different issues.
I understand.
And it also, in the context of a development agreement, there's a trade-off because there's only so much
Right, I understand.
that we can ask in community benefits. So it comes at a cost
I get
to
all
something
that,
else.
and I'm not saying I advocate this.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned with these guys go to the Coastal Commission. They're going to be saying they're going to be told you need to do affordable
Right.
units.
Right.
Commissioner?
It's a concern, and just to add to what's already been said, the difficulty of administering this kind of low income or low cost visitor accommodation on a site that has market rate as well as low cost is probably something most hotel developers will not be interested in, and they'll mostly be interested in paying the fee. Or
Right.
they'll mostly choose to pay the fee. I wouldn't say they're interested in it, but they would probably mostly choose to pay the fee. That's not really going to get us
Well, except the Coastal Commission
the
is
low cost accommodation.
The Coastal Commission's open to those fees, and it's actually in our program. So
Right,
there you
right.
go.
The Coastal Commission collection of fees of those sorts would not necessarily go to Santa Monica to build low-cost accommodation. They could go to build campgrounds in other parts of the
If
state.
you've got a hotel coming in from Santa Monica and they impose in lieu fees, I would assume it would come back to Santa Monica. I didn't say
it's-
otherwise.
It is,
Why,
we would not
doesn't make
assume
any
it.
sense.
It has not always historically gone to the community that paid the fees. It's gone towards the purpose, but not necessarily in the same community.
Okay, well, this is like an ongoing,
Yeah.
forever discussion.
Commissioner, may I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
if I can answer.
No, it's a follow-up question for staff, but it's a related topic, so
I have a couple more. Do you want me to do those first?
it's fine. I just
Okay.
wanted to.
The others are simpler. Is there anything in the LUP that would prohibit using beach parking lots for homeless overnight stays in vehicles?
No,
Do you know if the Coastal Commission has ever denied such a request?
no. I mean, we've been researching it in the Coastal Commission. Issues have not come up in the research. I believe, in fact, that there's one that just got started in Venice. So
Is it on a beach parking lot?
on the Rose Avenue Beach lot. So
Okay. Thank you. I only have
Okay.
two more.
Okay.
Don't you wish I had less free time?
Just talk.
Okay, all right. On policy 201, and this goes back to the Civic Auditorium, the language says very clearly that the shared parking on this site will serve all uses. Is that an accurate statement? It's on
city
page
shopping,
154.
Yes.
You think so? I have heard that there's actually a proposal to bring people to the Civic from Santa Monica College by a shuttle bus. So how would that comport with this?
That's not a proposal I'm familiar with.
It's in the Walker report.
Oh, you're talking about for Civic Auditorium parking in the evenings.
Civic Auditorium
Oh.
that's being used. I mean,
Oh,
one would
okay,
assume,
right. That
one
would
would
not be
assume from
like
this language
instead of
that everything could be
existing
used
uses.
well, and there's enough parking for everybody, and everybody will be happy on site. And I just wonder how accurate a statement that is.
I think the language here, the policy is that the city shall continue to develop based on the Civic Center specific plan, the shared parking to serve all uses, which is a basic policy of the Civic Center specific plan. So this here is reiterating the CCSP's policy on that
it
matter.
just seems that you're making some assurance from this that it's actually going to work. I guess that's.
I don't see this policy as making that assurance. It's a policy that the city has set.
I think keep in mind also that, when and if the Civic Auditorium reactivation occurs, it will require, potentially its own CDP. It will go through the process just like every other project in the CCSP, the Civic Center area has gone through, and will be looked at against the LUP in effect at the time.
I guess I mean, coming from redevelopment, I've never seen a site plan like this one's being planned, but maybe Santa Monica does it differently, where you have 3 different uses, and they're also happening sequentially, rather than in a particularly coordinated way.
Well, it has been coordinated over the course of 25 years. So
well, I'm hearing from Civic Auditorium people, they're like the last guy out the door, and they may end up with a short stick. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we were very clearly told, but I mean, at this point, I think that's sort of a conversation that's probably not appropriate to have right at this point, because we don't know. The proposals are not public yet. We don't have an application before us, so.
Okay, then my final question, do you have a sense, if you've even broached it with the Coastal Commission, as to how they're going to feel about the removal of the parking structure? That parking structure on 4th Street, at the ArcLight site?
No.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Didn't we put a reduction of parking spaces of 500 a year, or 500 over 5 years, or whatever it was, in the DCP? So none of that's been broached with them.
So that's right. So they have a copy of the DCP. They've seen it, and as Liz indicated, they have maintained an open mind about it. They haven't said this is, absolutely not acceptable. They've asked for the factual data that was the basis for making those decisions. We provided that to them. And, what we hope for at this point is that they continue to keep an open mind about it. We have reason to believe that, there's not an intent to, not work collaboratively to get this LUP adopted based on statements at past commission meetings where they've indicated access in Santa Monica is unique than a lot of cities on the coast, and we've really worked to highlight, why Santa Monica is unique, that we take a really comprehensive approach to access to the coast, which affects not just mobility, but really addresses, a lot of the, even the short-term rental vacation rental issue or accommodations that, we're not a city that's so isolated that, if you were to stay outside of the coastal zone, that you couldn't get there, by 10 minutes on bicycle or hop on the train and get there. And I think that a lot of coastal communities are not like that. And so, we're really trying to make that case and highlight it for them. And so those conversations are continuing.
Okay, well, I just want to close with saying, despite all this, great job. And the fact that you've been able to finesse all this with the Coastal Commission over the past couple of years is absolutely amazing. So you deserve kudos and a big party.
I'll take the party.
I just, first of all, that one question that I asked you about the this addendum thing.
Yeah, and I just looked at that, and the heights are correct in the supplemental staff report based on that it's the very highest possible, and that is the affordable housing, which I'm not sure if that was on your page, but we brought a copy of the DCP here if you didn't print that line, perhaps. So
I printed that part.
Okay.
Okay, well, frankly, I think that if you're going to say with state affordable housing bonus, put numbers that include state affordable housing bonuses, you have to say that that's what these numbers are, because they're not the DCP numbers. Well, and it sounds like, to me, I thought, oh, now we're raising the DCP heights in the coastal plan.
So just to clarify, the DCP 100% affordable housing incentive is not driven by state density bonus whatsoever. That is actually adopted within the DCP. So it's very clearly laid out there as the maximum, and that's what this table is meant to represent.
Where is it in the DCP? I tried to find it.
It's on, let me get it for you.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Huh?
It's in the development standards table in chapter 4. So you'll see 100% affordable housing for each zone, particularly if you look at like, well, all the zones actually. So on page 179, you'll see across the bottom 60 feet, 70, 70, 70, 84, 60, depending on the zone that you're in. So the intent of this is to make sure that we didn't want to list, every single tier, because that's not, it's, again, the less is more in terms of the LUP, so that it's all encompassing.
And this is also the format that we were asked by the Coastal Commission, that what they want to see in the LUP is the very highest height limit allowed. They don't want the detail. The actual approval of a project is going to be based on the city policy. So in this case, it would be based on the DCP before it gets to the CDP phase. When they're checking for the CDP, they want to make sure whatever was approved is within that maximum. That's all they need.
Well, I have to say that the copy of this, I don't have a printed copy of this updated one, so I downloaded it from the city website, and it is different, and it doesn't have those limits in it, so that's kind of messed up. I'm just saying. I don't know, it doesn't say here, but this is like a different page number, and it's a different color. Yeah, it's like not the right draft in the link on the website.
We'll check the
and
website and
the
make
downtown
corrections
plan, I
if
think, is
needed.
linked in 2 different places, and they might go to 2 different things, and so
Well,
that's not good. But here,
So that made me sad.
it makes me sad too.
And then my other question. My other question is about this new oceanfront walk scenic corridor. I can't really tell what directions these tiny arrows point, but one of the points of that scenic corridor was that it's not just about the ocean and the bluff and the mountain. It's really about the experience of the history of the Santa Monica Beach as a recreational place for everyone. And there are many landmarks along that corridor. So it's really the view down the corridor. And I can't tell if you have arrows showing that or not. So do you? It's teeny tiny.
Mm-hmm. Well, the views are looking both west and north in the arrows that are shown.
Not
and actually, I
south?
think there's one looking south as well. The third from the left, I believe, is looking south.
Well, maybe
And- yeah.
a key, they're numbered, and
Mhm.
maybe telling us what the numbers
Right.
are pointing at would be helpful.
Okay. And, we can also look at these pictures, and the arrows are examples. They're not the only places that are important. They're examples, and the numbers show you so that you know what you're looking at, and we can certainly look at that to improve it.
And I have one more really tiny little question. Isn't that study about the pier called the Pier Access and Use Study? And why did you change it to the Pier Access Study?
That was at the request of the Pier Board. I think they have changed their reference to the study title.
Except that if you want to actually look at that study, you need to Google it by the real name, so it doesn't make sense. Well, I wouldn't support that.
I will, okay.
All right, Amy's turn.
Hi, congratulations. Well done. I wanted to follow up on some of Commissioner McKinnon's questions. So it sounds like there's still hope that this will get certified, but if it doesn't get certified, or it gets certified with changes and then the council doesn't adopt those changes, then we stick with the status quo that developments would need to go up to the Coastal Commission to get approval. Is that?
Yeah, theoretically, that is one possibility.
Okay.
We would not be the only city that continues negotiations like right up to the end and beyond.
Uh-huh. I'm sorry, I missed the study session, so I'm sure you talked about this, but what is the implementation plan? How does that differ?
So the implementation plan is like a coastal zoning ordinance, essentially. If you think of this land use plan more like a general plan level.
Okay.
Even though some of the policies in here are so detailed that they seem like an ordinance.
I see.
But we would get into those, the details.
Okay. Okay.
And do basically a parallel zoning ordinance for the coastal zone. That's our next project.
So I wanted to ask about the short-term rentals, which, it's like what do you call that? We could just go down a rabbit hole here. But is there a middle ground on the short-term rentals, right? Like, I'm not always up to speed on all the city's regulations, right? So someone who has a house can rent a room in their house, right? That's allowed in Santa Monica, right?
That is a middle ground that the city has already allowed. That's home sharing, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And the other options are that a landlord who has a rental unit makes that rental unit available for a short-term rental?
That's what's currently not allowed by city policy.
But wouldn't you have to Ellis to be able to do that? Or is that the question?
That kind of goes beyond the scope of the LUP, but...
I just feel like there's other regulations that are inhibiting it.
Well, I think that's what led to the discussion in the first place, is that we were noticing that landlords were converting units, and when I say convert, probably in the loosest terms, to these short-term vacation rentals, sometimes entire buildings.
Yeah.
And they were offering buyouts, or however they evicted tenants, or effectively evicted them or moved them out, to turn them into these sorts of uses in contravention with rent control law. So there was wide concern about the loss of permanent rent control housing for this use that really wasn't authorized. In some cases, we even had tenants that were in rent control units turning around and renting it, on Airbnb. So we had that kind of activity happening as well.
Yeah.
And all of this really affects our permanent housing stock. So that's really where the city's middle ground in terms of home share came from.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm thinking of it is, to me, that, right, like, I certainly agree with the whole policy position, but I'd like to think that with the Coastal Commission, there is an argument related to the rent control laws, right? Like, not only is it a policy position that the city's taking, but allowing short-term rentals would be contradiction to a regulation.
Right. Yeah.
And, believe me, we pointed out everything we have to them, including the fact that the city has a very long-standing ordinance in regard to short-term rental not being allowed, and due to protection of rent control and housing and laws. And that is very different from a lot of communities in which they didn't have that kind of ordinance, and then they banned short-term vacation rentals, and some of those cities, people had short-term vacation rentals before they were banned legally, and then they banned them, and then that's a different. There are different contexts in other cities than what we have here. In addition to the very important fact, as Jing pointed out, that because of the way our city is, and our mobility and our transit and our bikeability and all that, you can stay out of the coastal zone at a less expensive hotel, which there are in Santa Monica, and get to the beach in 10 minutes. So, we're not like a Northern California small community where you can't get to one of the most pristine coves on the coastline because you can't stay there, because you have to drive there and you need a parking space, and all of those things. The Coastal Act really tries to keep the coastline open for visitation by the public in general, and that's not a problem in Santa Monica. So we're like, what does it achieve to change the whole city policy for short-term vacation rental? What does that really achieve in terms of real access to the coastline? And our position is, nothing that we don't already have. So.
I mean, I guess the related challenge, and this was kind of my follow-up to Commissioner Lambert's comments, I don't know, it's like, on the one hand, like, low-cost accommodations, it's not necessarily, I guess it could be, it's not necessarily creating access for lower income or moderate income people, right? It's just...
Well, that's true as well, that within the coastal zone, we have a lot of very expensive apartments. If they were rented on you know, legally for short-term vacation rental, what would they get?
Yeah.
Would they really
Right.
be cheap?
Right.
I
Right.
don't
Short-term
know.
rentals are not necessarily less expensive, right? And I think, right, that idea of low-cost accommodations is very laudable, and we should support. I don't know.
Right.
I just wonder, is there another way to get at low-cost accommodations, right? Like, the hostel is a good idea, right? Like,
Yeah.
could we be encouraging? How about a hostel in a DA?
I mean, I think that's an area that, you know, as the city has an in lieu fee for the replacement of the removal of, where a new hotel replaces existing low-cost accommodation. And I think that's the fee that Commissioner Lambert was referring to that hasn't been updated, and that is part of this project to actually update that fee. The Coastal Commission at the moment has, they can collect that. Basically, it gets collected twice from the applicant because we issue our city permit and it's our ordinance, and so they met the city requirement. Then when they go and get their CDP, there's, that can be imposed again. But, as to how that fee is spent, I think that's something that we can certainly look at as to who that goes to, and, making sure that it's obviously meant to create new low-cost accommodation. The hostel was the beneficiary of some of that money before. And, I think that obviously there are other accommodations within the city that may benefit from, some of those dollars to expand or add on to their facilities, that could benefit additional visitors, visitor accommodations.
I mean, I guess I just think of the hostel because, and I don't know what my point is here, except to think of other ways that people travel, right? Like, so maybe it's not exactly about accommodating lower income, but accommodating different sorts of travel. I don't know, which in some ways gets to low-cost travel.
It's a very sticky problem.
Yes, I agree. So I just wanted to follow up on a couple of comments from the public. Can you talk a little bit more about the public works, public health and safety, comment and concern? And I don't know. I mean, I hear the concern of the preservation
Right.
community. I feel like this is the kind of thing that came up, in earthquakes, where cities took advantage of a public safety concern to tear down buildings, and the preservation community had to kind of step in and say there was
Right.
alternatives. So,
Well, we all I can say is that we felt that this language, given that we're strengthening the view corridors and scenic, compared to the 92 LUP, we're really strengthening the language in here to define the view corridors and define what those views are. And as we were reviewing it, it just seemed that we wanted to make sure that somehow that would not be interpreted to say we couldn't, like, for instance, put a traffic light in, because that traffic light looking down a view corridor might interrupt the view. It's like things like that. So we weren't really, it's a general provision to accommodate those kinds of necessary things. And, the example of a 6-lane highway, first of all, that's like never going to happen because sea level rise. We're going to hope we can maintain PCH as we have it. So I don't think it's going to be expanded in the view corridors. But extreme examples like that, or like a power plant, are not likely to happen in Santa Monica. They're not zoned anywhere for us to do that.
But
so it's
I wonder
really
whether
those smaller issues that we want to make sure that we're not tying our own hands.
I mean, I guess
That's all.
I would say, I don't know what the language is, but if there is language that makes it clearer or makes it narrower, I think that would be appropriate, especially given how detailed the document is already. We shouldn't be afraid of detail.
I think we also want to emphasize that this policy does not override every other procedure. It doesn't change the LUCE, it doesn't change the zoning ordinance, it doesn't change CEQA, it doesn't change NEPA, it doesn't change our design review processes, the public hearing, the public processes that we have to go through for any public project that shape and define what happens. So, it's a policy that is specific to the LUP, as Liz was saying, because we are defining these scenic corridors much more deliberately compared to the sort of vagueness of the prior one, and we just wanted to be very careful that it is not interpreted that it's a prohibition on any sort of public works projects that may happen within these corridors. It doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to be just designed in whatever way it's proposed, because there are other controls that are present there that would prevent, for example, the destruction of historic resources. That's obviously something would have to be reviewed, and there's not this policy does not override all the procedures that are necessary to shape these kinds of projects.
Right. This presents a standard of review following all the procedures as Jane described. So, the standard of review for the CDP.
My comment holds.
Okay.
What about the Ken Kutcher's language about the pier parking? Because
right.
I think that's a great idea to take parking off the pier.
Well, whether I think that's a great idea or not, I feel is immaterial.
I guess just in terms of the Coastal Commission.
Is immaterial. I think that the language, and we've talked to the Pier Board, and by the way, the Pier Board sent a letter of support for this for the LUP. I hope that you received it probably late this afternoon if you did. And the decision about parking is a decision that's going to be made in a different forum. It's not a decision that's going to be made in the LUP. The LUP needs to be flexible so that when the city makes that decision one way or another to limit, to eliminate, or to whatever it is, the LUP needs to allow us to do that, and we feel that the current language in the LUP allows the city to do that. And so we don't think additional language is necessary.
I kind of hear you saying that policy decision needs to be made elsewhere. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Jennifer, you're up.
Hi. So I have like a list of comments and questions regarding I'll just call it the blue line.
We're just doing questions now.
Oh. Okay. Then I'm going to still go through the same list, and then if I have a comment, I'll skip it. And if it's a question, I'll ask it. And some of my questions are specific to the blue line, but then I have more general questions after. And if you'll just bear with me, my handwriting's pretty bad, but I promise I will. What is the purpose of, or I'm saying, let me decide how I'm going to explain this to everybody. I'm looking at the blue line, and I'm going to tell you the edit number I'm looking at, because that's the way I did it. So in edit number 8, the way you reworded the sentence on universal beach access, why did you leave out reference to universal design? Would it be, more appropriate to say it's important to consider universal design and all individuals, or is that deliberate, or is it just not necessary there? Like it feels like. Like, is the focus just really on all individuals, or is the focus really on universal design? And which makes it stronger?
So the language is more of a explanation of what universal design is, rather than using the term universal design, right?
Okay.
Is that what?
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
that's the language that we chose.
Okay. I kind of still felt like it needed a little work, but I'll skip that for now.
I think we didn't want to introduce a term that might not be understood universally.
Haha. Okay. I don't necessarily agree with that necessarily, but I understand what you're saying. Let me come back to that. We might need to talk about that later. I don't know. Regarding edit number 25, which is the vacation rental, you and I just say, Liz and I talked on the phone a little bit, and so some of the things that I'm going over now publicly, we went over on the phone, but I just want to point out that in the second sentence of edit number 25, that starts, while short-term rental of entire units continues to be prohibited citywide, et cetera, I recommend that be modified to say while vacation rentals of entire units, or you should say while vacation rentals or short-term vacation rentals, either way. And so that's my first recommendation.
To add the word vacation.
And then I have a second, and then I have a question. And this goes to a broader question about like cross-referencing other documents, like the zoning ordinance. Corporate rentals are prohibited by ordinance, but they're not mentioned here. So if it's not mentioned here, does that mean that this document in this zone area, corporate rentals are no longer prohibited? And if that's the case, then I would urge it to say while vacation rentals and corporate housing.
So the absence of that in here does not mean that the city now allows it.
Okay.
So
thanks for that clarification. Okay, so then I would say make sure it says, because short-term rentals here isn't capitalized. It, to an extent, short-term housing rentals were once defined and changed into corporate housing, but we can talk about that another day. Okay, my next question is about edit number 68. Oh, no, my next question, I'm sorry. My next question is about edit number 37. I don't understand why, if the Coastal Commission is suggesting to remove the reference to the general plan, you're deciding to delete that second sentence. The general plan is referenced in the first sentence, and the second sentence has a pretty important meaning. You're suggesting that even though the Coastal Commission is saying to remove the general plan reference, you're suggesting the removal of an entire meaning. You're proposing to remove, in no case shall the policies of the coastal land use plan be interpreted to allow a development to exceed a development limit established by the general plan or its implementing ordinances. Why isn't it possible to just reword that to keep the meaning in there but remove the reference to the general plan? I mean, to me,
I'm
that kind of
my
language.
memory to remember the conversation with the Coastal Commission that
Okay,
resulted in
thank
this
you. Yeah, I
decision.
appreciate that.
But this
Does anyone else know?
that is how we got there.
I mean, obviously, that's like a pretty important
May I
concept. It's like an
make a-
institutional memory.
Perhaps it's because we are adding those numbers that I questioned earlier elsewhere in the plan, and those are the limits.
Is that,
I'm
so,
just making a suggestion that that might be why we don't need it there.
okay, and Chair, you feel that that is an adequate substitution, and
Yes.
generally speaking, okay. All right. I would, if you don't have to necessarily respond to me now, but maybe as we move on and get toward deliberations, you might want to respond, but thank you, Chair, person, because that does help me a lot.
I think you're right, too.
Okay, my next question is, I believe, regarding policy 68. No, I'm sorry. What is it called? It's edit number 68. The blue line says beach walkway, but that I'm not completely clear on what that is. It says allocations adjacent to the public beach or beach walkway. So I just, I mean, obviously there's a lot to go over in here. What am I missing? What is beach walkway? Is that defined somewhere?
The beach walkway is generally oceanfront walk or the extensions of the beach walkways that go down like Palisades, along Palisades.
Okay, so that's
Beach
what I was
Road.
wondering. So can it be clarified to say oceanfront walk and whatever?
Yeah, it can be.
I
You
think
could
that
make
would.
that recommendation.
I mean, unless beach walkway is much more broad and encompasses more, then I'm in favor of that broader language. But if it's unclear and someone down the line is going to go, I don't know what that means, then we need to define it more.
Okay.
Okay.
And this
and
is
then-
also language, by the way, that I think we've got another comment from the Coastal Commission staff that we're working on, so we may make
Okay, great.
additional changes.
Thank you. Okay, my next is, just give me one moment and I'm going to tell you. I concur with the issue regarding policy 143, which is edit number 75, but I'm going to skip over that for the moment. I am now at the height projections, missing land use, I got it, definition. Okay. Now, regarding, well, actually, I covered cross-references for the moment. Okay, I'm going to skip the supplemental staff report just for the moment and go to some of my broader questions. Nothing in this document preempts anything. I think we were saying this earlier, but in, for example, the city's rent control law. Nothing that happens in this document prevents any of those from still being in effect or being, okay. How often can you amend this document? Is
there a
subject to limitations?
I don't think it's like a general plan restriction on the number. It's you just have to go through the process for amendment in the Coastal Act.
Okay. All right. I'll just make this comment. It was a question earlier, but it seems like in some of the blue lines there are references to non-conforming buildings and non-conforming structures, and they're used interchangeably. I would say straighten those out so that they're consistent. Okay. My next question is about, okay. It is actually, I'm sorry, it's about the supplemental. Page 78 in the supplemental that was issued to us, I would propose that we add the word sidewalks. Is that possible to do? Because it says there's views from the street. I'm sorry, no, it says street and alley, I believe. And then it makes reference to public right-of-way, but the sidewalks are that. And so is it possible to add sidewalks to that?
It's possible. I think streets is inclusive of the sidewalks.
And that's like universal design that not some people know, but
say,
other people know. Is that definitely a known thing?
We could use the words right of way if that is better.
I like it better too.
You like which better, right of way? Okay. All right, and then I have a question for you about future changes, and this is something that we touched on briefly today, but I also wanted to bring it up to make sure that the commission heard it or also thought about it. One of the things I asked you today was, what about future changes to the code, for example, the zoning code, or the downtown plan, or the portions of the code that are about the downtown plan? Does that mean that we have to go ahead and change this plan? And and you might be able to explain it a little better than I am about to do, but it sounds like you said to me that any changes to this plan require asking the Coastal Commission to accept that change, and they could deny it. So our downtown plan, to an extent, all right, our zoning code definitely is like a living document. Things get changed. I mean, I don't know if Paula's still here, but she loves her text amendments. So as things go forward throughout the years and there's changes, let's say there's a use that's currently permitted, but for some reason it changes. I'll just use that as an example. If the Coastal Commission and the City Council agrees to change it, if we ask the Coastal Commission to make that change in this plan and they say no, then they're different and they conflict. So I don't understand why that is, first of all, and is there an easier way to make sure that they remain consistent throughout time?
Right. Well, to the extent that this plan is less detailed, some of those changes won't matter. For instance, let's just say changes were made to the requirements for plazas or something in the DCP. Well, we don't have anything in here specific about that. So the question would be, did that change now become inconsistent with something in here? So we would have to look and say, did it or didn't it? If the answer is no, well, no, it's still general, then a project that was approved with that change coming before the Coastal Commission, they'd look at the standard of review, they'd see no conflict, and it would be fine. To the extent, like if we decided 75 feet instead of 70 feet for affordable housing, we would have to go back and amend this because this says 70. So it all depends on that level. And in the next project, in the implementation plan, which will be more detailed, you know,
That's
looking
an
way
opportunity.
down the line, when that would be approved, there would be a lot more conflicts when there are changes because that will be more detailed.
And and I guess the implementation plan, once that document is finalized, the same sort of thing applies. If there's a change here and we want to make
Right.
that change in the IP, the same process would have to be followed, and it may or may not be
Right.
agreed to, depending on how. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you for that. Can you explain? One of the things that we talked about really briefly was like the difference in appeal abilities between the original jurisdiction and the rest of the areas. Can you explain that
Right.
again? Give me
Okay.
a refresher on that.
So what you're referring to is a policy. This is at the very beginning of policies, so it's on page 94.
Yes.
And
I'm aware.
it notes the area of original jurisdiction, and then it says, in addition, actions that the city takes on coastal development permit applications. So that means after the full LCP has been certified and the city is now issuing CDPs. They're appealable to the Coastal Commission, and this is based on state law, in these certain circumstances, and this is the 4. And so it's really basically saying that the most sensitive coastal areas, even when the city is allowed to issue CDPs, can be appealed to the Coastal Commission. But areas that do not meet these 1 through 4 criteria, or projects that don't meet that, would not be appealable. So the City Council's decision on the CDP would be final.
Thanks. I'm actually really glad I asked that again because I didn't exactly get it for some reason when we talked, but now I do. Okay, so thanks for that. And let me just, this is my last little bit of things that I consider questions, I guess, at this point. I did that. I don't know why I said page 93. Hold on a second. Oh, I know why. I can skip that. I guess I don't think the answer is, I think I know the answer to this already, but because the document makes reference to motorized vehicles on the bike path, is this the place to talk about that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Darn. Okay.
But you can talk about the snowy plover if you want to talk about birds.
I love birds. I love birds. Okay, I will. I will. And let me just make a quick comment because I am done with my questions, but I'm just going to make a quick comment anyway. I just want everybody to remember that with the vacation rental ordinance and the home sharing ordinance, it applies to all units. Of course, protecting rent-controlled tenants is part of it, but because it's a citywide law, those ordinances are citywide laws. They apply whether you're in a rent-controlled unit or you're in a market rate unit, and for good reason, because obviously those ordinances help protect rent-controlled tenants, but they also help build community, and people living in, people living in long-term residential units. But people who live in market rate units also want to have protections too, because they don't want to be living next to vacationers who are coming and going every other day or partying or whatever it is. So it is kind of not just about rent-controlled tenants, although those concerns may have been amplified when those ordinances were passed. And thank you for answering all of my questions and great work on the document. I still have some concerns and comments, but I pulled them out pursuant to the chair's request, and we'll get perhaps to those later. Thank you.
Mario.
I'll be quick. Just a couple of clarifications. This is going here. On policy number 42 in the staff, the little supplemental package here you just sent us, the last sentence is confusing to me, and it has to do with when is a coastal permit required for an event. And it says the planning director makes that decision, except the Coastal Commission makes that decision if the event is to take place within the commission's area of original jurisdiction. So
Right.
isn't everything within the original jurisdiction?
No, the area of original jurisdiction is like that was on the map west of that red line that was shown on the map.
Oh, so anything west of that line, any event
Right.
west of that line. So
Right.
if Cirque du Soleil shows up at the beach, they
Right.
don't get a local approval. They have to go to Long Beach.
Well, what that particular policy says is that we have specific criteria of what requires this, which temporary events require a CDP versus don't require CDP. And this language that the Coastal Commission asked us to add says, despite the fact that we have these specific criteria, if there's something special about the event that really could have an impact, the planning director can say, you know what, I still want you to get a CDP because this could have coastal impacts. And if it's within the area of original jurisdiction, that determination about whether it's, still needs a CDP would be made by the director of the executive director of the Coastal Commission. So that's what that language is.
Okay. So,
like, I don't know, think Olympics, that'll probably need a CDP.
yeah, well, that's the obvious one. It's going to be a big
Right.
event. It will affect access, and it's in that area behind the red line, I guess you
Right.
call it. So that's one question, one clarification. The other question, I too was confused the way Commissioner Fresco was talking about the maximum heights, and it's almost like you need some sort of sentence above that table or something that says these maximum heights are not available to all, let's say, particular developments, but are unique to certain developments or something, because otherwise people look at that and say, oh, look, maximum height, 60 feet, I'm in. And they're not.
Right. But remember, where people will look to see, people proposing a development, where they're going to look to see what can I do is in the zoning code and at some point in the implementation plan. This sets the standard of review for a CDP, which is that extra level of review for coastal afterwards, right? So, so it isn't necessary. If that language was necessary, the Coastal Commission would have made us put it in. But this is the typical way these standards are presented.
Okay, well,
in an LUP.
Okay. So another question is regarding the sea level rise issues. There's a whole series of triggers that are built in. Certain things have to be done based on certain other events, and which is good because it seems to be getting a little bit real now. We have to take these measurements, doing all these surveys and such. Who pays for all that?
Who pays for doing like the monitoring?
The monitoring, the surveying, the transects, all the elements. There's several. I mean, it's quite detailed.
I don't know that we have the answer to that. I mean, ultimately, if the city is required to do something, the city either has to pay or has to find a way that it can be done. Like, for instance, if it's already being done by another body, but if the county is doing work and collecting data, we can be the beneficiaries of that. If they're not and we have to do it, the city might have to do it. I don't think we actually have yet figured out that, but it will need to be figured out.
Okay. Which leads to my last question, which is one of the advantages of getting rid of the Coastal Commission and doing all the work, so to speak, in-house is that we could presumably save on, let's call them review costs, for lack of a better word, because now it only happens once. You have your parking checked once, your lot coverage checked once, your heights checked once, as opposed to doing them two different places. Is there anything in this document that would make your plan check process by the city any different anywhere in the city compared to where the same thing happening in the coastal zone?
Well, and you're talking about not here in this document, but at the end of the process.
At the end of the
At
process.
the end of the process, when
CDPs
CDPs are being issued by the city.
Right. Is the CDP any different than any other planning approval that might roll out?
Well, it's different in that the CDP, the decision about issuing a CDP or determining if it's exempt from a CDP, right? Because that'll be a process in the IP as well. would be made by the city,
Mhm.
right, probably planners who are reviewing, but it would be like a separate permit where there would be a standard of review. And when I say separate, it could be like, when you get several permits and they're all in one decision, right?
Mhm.
So one more of them would be, does this meet the coastal development permit standards, findings, whatever those findings are, those will be set in the IP. It's one finding, two findings, I don't know. They're
Mhm.
made.
Right.
And they're based on the standard of review that starts with these policies and gets developed in the IP. And so it's just making that determination. So if something's inconsistent with this, that would, that you wouldn't be able to do it. So.
Right, but what I
that's
was
how it is.
asking is to discover that inconsistency as opposed to be inconsistent with any other part of the
Right.
zoning code.
Right. It
Why?
would be the same kind of thing.
Why would it be any more time-consuming or expensive for
It
an
probably
applicant?
would not be in most cases.
Yeah, well,
Unless-
that's what I'm trying
yeah.
to get to.
Yeah, probably
I'm
not.
trying to get to is never more expensive or time-consuming because it's just
Right.
rolled in to the standard approval process. It doesn't involve
That's
any
right.
any additional effort, so to speak, by anybody.
Right.
It does not, but just to clarify, because, at the end of the process, we'd be creating a new permit, so we'd have to do a fee study. So if you're talking, there would be a fee associated with issuing the CDP, issuing a CDP.
And the question I'm asking is why do you need a fee for that? It's the exact same approval process.
Well, we would, I can't say whether we would or we wouldn't, because we would have to do the fee study to determine how much staff time is associated with that portion of the review, because it is another permit to get, which doesn't apply to projects that are not in the coastal zone, so.
It's still a discretionary permit.
Right.
And you'd still need it before you get your building permit.
Yeah,
so.
but I'm again asking what is the material difference if you have to check 10 things on every project?
We're not
We
adjudicating
don't
at
know
this
yet.
moment what the fee, I'm just saying that because we would have to create a fee study that determines if or what that fee is, or if there's a policy to waive it, or, all of that is not the decision to be made now. But, where you have a permit that's being issued, it needs to show up on our list of activities, right? So that people know, do I get charged for it or do I not? That's just part of the process. So it's the
When
same
we
thing
have
we
the
went through.
IP, we'll know.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it might not be just a few more things to check. It might end up being 100 new boxes to
Right,
check.
we don't know that information right now.
Well,
And
that's
there
what
may
I'm...
be categories that are determined to have waivers, that to be, that we determine that there's a waiver from a CDP for these projects. Then those will be simple. And the others that aren't may not be. But we won't know till we've done that process and
Okay,
come
well,
up with that.
Okay, you know how I feel about this.
We do. We appreciate it too.
Yeah, I'll first lend my voice to the chorus of compliments.
Thank you.
And I also want to, acknowledge from your description of how the Coastal Commission has learned about, how Santa Monica approaches these issues, and that there are so many areas where there is agreement. I want to acknowledge the Coastal Commission's recognition that local conditions matter, local strategies matter.
Right. Coastal Commission staff.
Thank you.
We have not
Thank
met
you
with the
for clarifying.
commissioners.
Right.
Staff, right.
So the ability to rebuild and the language that was proposed within public comment tonight, does that adjustment to the language fit with the intention of the language?
Sorry.
Were you able to
in
see
general?
were you able to see the tweak to the language that was
Mhm.
proposed in public comment?
I'm sorry, which comment?
The ability to rebuild in the hazard zones.
Oh, the rebuild, I'm sorry, rebuild in hazard zones. I think we thought that language was okay, right?
Yeah, I think it's a nice improvement. The way it's written here is what we meant to say, and I could see how it could be read the other way, that it's like a prohibition, which was not the intent. It was to comply with the policies that are triggered. So I think we find that change acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
sorry about that.
The language regarding the parking variances, First of all, I assume that would only apply if there is a parking minimum. Am I understanding that correctly?
You're referring to policy 20 or 21?
I believe I'm looking at 22. Is that where that within a parking variance, the minimum necessary for project feasibility?
Oh, okay, adding that language.
So that would only apply if there's a minimum requirement, right?
Well, so that was language that the Coastal Commission had requested, and the intent behind that was that if the city is going to issue a variance, it's not like, well, as long as we're giving you a variance, we'll give you a variance from all of it. You know, it's like, what's the minimum that the project could be feasible and still provide? And so that was their concern, that this language wouldn't be so broad that it could be overused. And so
okay,
that's what the adjustment.
Perhaps I should get clarification. As drafted right now, is there a minimum parking requirement within the downtown?
Within downtown,
area?
no.
Right.
No. But that variance language.
So this would only apply outside of the downtown area, and this would have no effect on
downtown.
Right. So outside of the downtown area,
right.
When you think about the considerations that go into a parking variance approval, what's the operative? What's the impact of this language?
Of adding that minimum.
Right. That feasibility, the minimum needed for project feasibility.
You know, I think in general that's how we approach things anyway, so it may not have that much impact, but it would mean that if an applicant came along and, you know, we were looking and saying, you know, it would be feasible for you to put in the 4 parking spaces and you're asking to put in only 2, based on this, we'd have to say, look, you know, we're going to have to, you know, reduce that variance request you're asking for, as an example.
And would that limit the city's ability, when considering parking variances, the city's ability to consider other factors? Like there could be some site issues that, even though project feasibility could be achieved at one level, that a lower level allows other goals that relate to perhaps impacts on the surrounding neighborhood.
You know, it's possible. Yeah. I mean, as I said, this is language that was requested by the Coastal Commission, and we reached a compromise and agreed on this. I don't think it'll make a lot of difference in a lot of cases, but it might. But also, if the city has a whole bunch of requirements that you need to meet, and that affects the feasibility, that's going to be part of what would affect, you know, if getting rid of that one more parking space means everything else fits, you could make that finding, right?
Yeah,
that's the minimum. But if getting rid of an extra one unnecessarily,
it does not change. I think the question is, does it change how we view our findings in the zone? Because we have variance findings for parking reduction in the zoning ordinance, and of course, you know, we've been through a few of those, and it's not an easy bar to cross. It doesn't change any of those findings, you know, in terms of all the reasons, you know, why someone could request a variance and the grounds under which it could be granted, all those things. You know, that doesn't change this at all. This is really to address an issue that has happened in the past where the city has issued variances, you know, based on our findings, and then the applicant has gone to the Coastal Commission. We've seen this actually very common in residential situations. They've got a 1-space parking variance because there's nowhere else it could fit on the site. And then they go to Coastal Commission, they're told, well, you have to provide your parking. And they're like, oh, where is that going to go? You know, without removing a structure or a tree or what have you out of the way. So this is meant to provide that out, which is not present in the current LUP.
Thank you.
Richard.
So when Ms. Larmore was here, she made some reference to the large sites, or the 2 sites specifically. There's a third one. Did you see validity in the comments that they advanced, which was that there needed to be some supportive language inside this document to support the concept that the heights might go to 130 feet. I mean, I was on the losing
Right.
part of this argument here before, so it's not
Right.
my personal interest, but
So the background for established large sites is set on page 31, and so we think it's there. In other words, it's not like the policy is in on the chart, in the new development policies with like absolutely no reference to ELS.
So
as
have you
was
discussed that with the
explained,
coast?
and because it is in there, and we felt that was sufficient.
and is that something you've discussed with the Coastal Commission staff?
Yes, yes, in terms of the letter that they sent and they asked questions about established large sites, that was partly because, especially when that letter was written fairly soon after the DCP was approved, and they didn't understand what they were. And so we had a lot of discussions about it, and in the end, what we came down to is that if the heights and the FAR's maximums are in that chart, that's kind of all that they needed to have in there.
What's driving my interest is that we have these established policies, the loose and the DCP,
Right.
and so on, and I want to make sure that what we have worked out here gets carried forward in such a way that it can be implemented, not just on this, but on parking and various other things. The discussion tonight about inverted commas low-cost accommodation for people who visit, leaving aside this concept of share housing and so on, is there some other way we could incentivise relatively lower cost accommodation, say along Lincoln, where there are at least a couple of motels that provide lower accommodation? I actually think it's a very important ideal that we provide inside in Santa Monica some accommodation that is not those two hotels that came to us and said they were medium and they started at $250 or $300 a night. That's not a medium accommodation. But when you look through it, all these minimums here all start at $250, $300 and skyrocket into the $700. I mean, we'll become an enclave for just the very rich if we are not already at that. So what would be possible? Is it creating an overlay zone along Lincoln that would allow some flexibility? I mean, how would we tackle that?
I mean, I think just throwing in, this has never been discussed ever with anybody, but, similar to how we incentivize.
Are you having a sort of a freelance thing? Is that what
Maybe,
you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know. It's getting late, but how we've incentivized housing compared to commercial uses. If there was interest, from this commission or the council, you could do a very similar thing, I presume, with low-cost accommodation. That if someone were to pursue accommodations that didn't exceed a certain room rate, they voluntarily decide to do that, that they have an advantage, on height or FAR or what have you, or a parking break. I mean, there's certainly things at a local level that we've never been asked to explore that as a staff, but just some ideas that we might have at the top of our head, and we could certainly research that if we were given that direction. But we've done it for different kinds, for preferred land uses, if you will, and so I don't see why we couldn't do that in this case.
Well, I do think it's actually a very important thing. It is important that the beach and the coast be accessible to everyone, and we do have large amounts of parking, we do have a public transport, but it's important that people are actually able to stop within relatively close distance. And we say, yes, Santa Monica has the advantage of being, as part of Los Angeles, but it's still some distance away for people and families, and it's an important social element of what we're doing moving forward, and Lincoln would be the ideal part that is part of the coastal zone.
And there might be tools, as Jing suggests, that we can explore in the future, and I'm sure the Coastal Commission would be thrilled if the city made that a priority. But we also want, and we do keep reminding the Coastal Commission the perspective. 17 to 21 million people a year come to our beaches. In the last 5 years, it's been between 17 million and 21 million people. That's like over 42,000, I think it's like people a day on average, obviously more on some days and less on others. But the numbers seem to suggest that a lot of people get to Santa Monica Beach, and these are the numbers the lifeguards count. This isn't even the people who are in the downtown and don't realize that the beach is over there. That's the numbers of people who access the beach. And so, again, You know, we every once in a while just try to like pull ourselves out of the weeds and remember that the Coastal Act is about access to the coast. It's about dipping your toe in the water, right? And so the accommodation, all the stuff is important, more important in some places than in other places. But when you have 17 to 21 million people who are dipping their toes in the water, you know, at our coastline, I think we're doing pretty well in terms of creating access to the beach, however it is that people are getting there. So.
Yeah, the geography is working for us. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So
and transit and bikes.
And transit and bikes.
And a lot
and
of
it would just be nice to layer in something else which allows people with families to who don't earn thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend some part of the time in Santa Monica. And more importantly, it would do a good deal for our city because it would layer in not the extremely rich. I'd like to go to one last point, which is the sea rise, and maybe it's for our consultant. So I look at the numbers, which suggest by 2030 that the sea rise is up by a foot, and then from 30 to 50 it could go up by 2 feet. And you talk about it going back to the beginning of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that put the sea rise? What impact will that have on, say, people who live in Ocean Park? How will that, in practical terms, impact? Where is that line?
Mm-hmm.
Because it does seem to me that we've had a speeding up of the climate change that we've been talking about, that the prognostications of 20 years ago are now deepening at a faster rate, that we see on the Great Barrier Reef that there's more dying of the coral, and right around the world the climate is getting more extreme. So even 2 years ago, what was projected as the extreme is more likely to be the low mid-range.
Right. So you're asking by around 2030 what you're...
Well, let's start 2030, and that's where your short and medium term kicks in.
Yeah. So Santa Monica is very lucky that it's protected by a lot of the wide beaches currently. So its early impacts will likely, if you're talking just storm surge and flooding for the biggest impacts, nothing is really going to be crossing PCH. So when we get to midterm...
Wait, PCH, but there's a lot of Santa Monica this side of PCH.
So in terms of development, how is it going to affect it, or just...
No, there's two parts of Santa Monica. There's the bit north of the pier.
Yes.
Some houses down there. And then there's the bit that the Ocean Park, Sunset Park type of the city.
Yes. So,
is that impacted heavily?
By
somewhat?
2030?
Yes, and then 2050.
No, not heavily. I wouldn't say heavily. So the way that you can kind of, it's hard to say with dates because this is not based off of dates for the most part. It's based off of triggers.
But the people who live down there do work on dates and times and feet. Like, I mean, they need some understanding of what's it going to mean to them and their kids, I guess.
So specifically, if you look at by 2030, I think it's in the appendix, the midterm maps. In Appendix 6, I believe it is.
The midterm maps are in Appendix 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you look at where the short-term maps are not included in here, though, right?
No. I think we're the midterm and we have the long-term map.
In the short term, we're not expecting much to cross past the beach, and that's why a lot of the development policies really get into the midterm. So when you see...
So next 12 years, okay, in your judgment?
By 2030, we're not expecting people's houses to be like heavily flooded or the development in that area to be heavily flooded. No. So how you can kind of interpret this without using the dates, but thinking of the short and midterm policies, is if you look at the difference between the development policies in the short term and the development policies in the midterm, and the specific number, for example, that really makes this difference clear, is if you look at policy 80, it's the Shoreline Development Policy.
Mm-hmm.
The Shoreline Development Policy 80 limits it to small and easily movable structures that are low density. So that is if these are in the hazard maps and if they've been hit more than 30%, this 30% for continuous flooding, 6 hours more than one time a year for a 3-year period, that was determined through the Coastal Commission as like the triggers that these developments need to hit. And so
how you can determine when something is really starting to be hit hard is based off of 80. Previous to 80, your development doesn't need to be small, easily movable, low density. It just needs to comply with the LCP policies, really, and do like technical studies and things like that. So prior to midterm sea level rise, we are not expecting dramatic things to be happening whatsoever. It's at the midterm, we're still not really at dramatic, but we're at, okay, if it does happen faster than we expect, we can remove them, or we'll have more elevation. So where people are living won't be that they have to like evacuate immediately. And then at the long term is when you see removal, a lot of these adaptation management, actual city structures having to be moved, buyout programs, things like that.
And that's 100 years off.
I mean, yeah, well, we're not thinking dates, but probably, yeah. So that's long term and extreme.
It's great you're not thinking dates. But when we sit here, we see things that take, 8, 10, 12 years to come through the process, and a structure pops up, and they got entitlement a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
So if that happens in 12 years and it's in the Ocean Park area or somewhere else, that's an interesting issue, because if the speed of change is quicker than we've thought,
right,
are they in the firing line is really the issue. I mean,
so
is that something planning commissions over the next 5, 10 years have now got to start thinking about?
The idea with the policies in the short term is that there's enough steps that the development would have to take to know that in the 50-year lifespan, 75-year lifespan, it will or it will not be within these hazard areas. So even though it may be going through the planning phase right now, and it's in the short-term phase right now, for example, there's a policy that lists the estimated lifespan of certain developments. You would look at the estimated lifespan of the development that you're planning for. And then from there, you would look at, okay, it's a 75-year development. Within those 75 years, it needs to prove that it isn't going to cause beach erosion. It's not going to have severe damage. It does pass these technical studies. So there's conditions that these developments will have to add to their property, or deed restrictions showing that they will be in a hazardous zone likely at this stage, that stage, or... So even though while what I'm trying to explain is it may be in the short term right now, if it's developing and it's in the planning phase, and when this is approved, it will still need to prove that for the lifespan of the development, it does not cause issue or does not have an issue.
So let's make it real. There's 2 development review permits coming up on September the 5th that are right in the firing line. What should we be asking about?
So if you look at sorry, I don't have the numbers memorized, but for example, 63, conditions of approval for a CDP. What they would have to do is a site-specific hazard study if it's in those hazard zone maps. And the hazard zone maps, just to remind you, are for long term. So even though it may not be in a short or midterm area right now, if the development is within maps A to E, which show long term, it still has to do all of these things. So if it's in the long-term hazard map, it needs to have a site-specific sea level rise and coastal hazards technical study done. It needs to have implementation mitigation measures for unavoidable coastal resource impacts if that site-specific study shows that there will be impacts. It will need to have some sort of deed restriction that exempts the city from liability if some of these coastal hazards do happen within the lifespan. It will also have another deed restriction that says it removes authorities and development to restore the area to its natural condition if the following occur. A government agency has ordered the development is not to be occupied due to imminent threat to occupants' health or safety. The city has determined that services to the site can no longer be maintained, such as utilities, roads, and or the development is no longer located on private property due to the migration of the public trust boundary. So for example, those are conditions that the project would have to have for a CDP. That's one thing that it could do. If it's a temporary structure, you can put expiration dates on the temporaries, or if the development has temporary structures attached to it, you can condition it to say these temporary structures need to be removed at X date or X trigger. There's a whole list of what your technical study needs to have. So your site-specific study has to, it just can't be any old site-specific study. There's very specific measures that
this does say, but it will be even more specific in the implementation plan, for example. And the Coastal Commission will have to make sure that those are approved as well as how they do their site-specific studies.
So it seems to me that this is the first major document of the climate change era that we're seeing in Santa Monica that at least half the city has a huge interest in.
Yeah.
Especially the low-lying areas. Yes.
I'm over the hill, too.
I'm on a hill.
But
I'll be dead by then.
I guess the issue is if it does speed up, and we are seeing signs of the climate change speeding up, does this document accommodate it sufficiently, or will we have to revisit it?
I think it needs to be, the science, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, says it needs to be revisited every 10 years, just scientifically, the maps. And the sea level rise data will be continuously being taken through, like Liz explained, the city of Santa Monica or NOAA's tide gauges, those 4 different ways.
So is 10 years enough?
I believe so. If we think about this new extreme scenario that just came out, for example, the H++ scenario, it took an incredibly long time for that to come out, to get approved. I think while the science may come out earlier than 10 years, the process that science has to go through to be approved through state agencies or federal agencies for it to be best available science for the state of California will definitely take that long. And the state of California's guidance is take 5 to 10 years to change. The California Coastal Commission's guidance, for example, the sea level rise guidance was approved in 2015. Its science is no longer what the state of California considers best available science. So they have to do an update now too. And I think that this science is, going to get outdated at some point, but it does have, it is based, the hazard maps are based off of the long-term scenarios, which is what makes it definitely will be okay for the next 10 years. If those hazards map, for example, were just based off of short-term or mid-term, I would say maybe not. But since these hazard maps are looking at the long-term, potentially 2100 year events, then yes, it will definitely cover planning projects that will be approved within the next 10 years.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question of Liz. On page 146, where you have the allowable uses in the various districts, did you not include uses that required CUPs? Because I noticed in the single family you don't have the early child care, whatever it's called, early childhood education center. You just have a family daycare. I mean, if you included all the CUP lists uses, it would be a much bigger chart.
That's a catch. We could make that change.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's it.
Amy, do you remember what you were going to say?
I'd like to move approval.
I have many more comments. Now, I have a question about procedurally. I mean, do we have to ask you about every one of our changes and you can sign off on it, or if we?
Your microphone.
Or if we?
Turn it on.
It is on. It's just flopping.
And not red.
Do we have to ask you here now? Like, should I go through? I have like 10 little tweaks here. Do I have to ask you everyone and have you say, yes, we can do that, no, we can't do that, in order to know what's going to go to council?
I think you can do it the way you want to do it. If you want to read into the record all of your changes and say, with this we recommend, and these are our other recommendations, then
it should be included in the motion that's voted upon to be very clear about what you collectively as a commission are including in your recommendation to the city council.
So, and then my other question about that particular fact is, so when we make our suggestions, and what does city council get what we're going to suggest today in their draft, or are they just going to get this?
No, we will forward your recommendation with everything in your recommendation.
In an errata sheet or in the document?
Yes. No, we're not going to reprint, but it will be in some kind of addenda.
Well,
We could attach it to the resolution.
I would like council, I mean, they're going to read this document and then they're going to have this errata and then they're going to have to say, oh, wait.
I think the clearest way would be to attach it to the resolution.
But aren't we the ones who are supposed to be recommending things to city council and not staff? So shouldn't what we're suggesting the document be the one that goes to council? I just find this kind of thing really frustrating.
So you have basically what's presented to you before you tonight is the draft LUP, the July 3rd, 2018 version, as amended by the addenda, right? So that is what is presented as the whole of the document. This is the exact same process we did for the DCP. We
I didn't like it then either.
Republish. I understand that it's a ton of work to republish, and we're scheduled or anticipating to go to council in August, and we just don't want to create a confusing document. So
well, I think it does create a confusing document. If I were, I mean, just going through this, of course, we didn't have this to review. I mean, this was a nightmare. It took so much longer than it should have to. And, council members are busy picking garbage trucks on top of everything else. I would like them to read what we suggested and not have ours go as a letter like every other member of the public.
It won't be. I guess what I'm saying is it's presented to the council as the planning commission's right. So I'm not sure I'm understanding is that it's not like there's a staff recommendation and a planning commission. That's not the case.
Well, I would like the draft that goes to council to be a planning commission draft and have the addenda be what staff wants to change. That's what I'm asking for.
Are you suggesting that the addenda is not acceptable, or?
Yeah, I think an addenda makes our suggestions second class, and we're supposed to be making a recommendation.
I'm not understanding the concern, because you'll have the council will have the document, and then they will have a sheet like under the cover that says here are it's included as part of the council resolution on here's the whole of what they're acting upon. So it does include the planning commissions. It's all merged into one. Like, it's not like it's lost somewhere as an attachment or something. It's included with.
So it's included in the council resolution, not our resolution. Like, that's what I thought you were suggesting.
Well, what I hear you saying is you want it in the document that's presented to council for them to look at as the integrated document with your comments.
Right.
And traditionally, apparently, we have separated them out. And so what you're asking is that we not do that. And that's your prerogative to ask that.
So what do other commissioners feel about that idea?
I would like to comment, but I think Commissioner Perry was ahead of me.
Well, Amy's actually next, but she appears to have left the room. And then you, Jennifer, on this list.
Okay, so I'll just say that to a great extent I agree with what the chairperson is saying, and I think, if I may, what she's saying is that perhaps it's time to look at the way we present the material to the council in a different way going forward, that there's always a time to try something new, and that this time might be now. And I share her concerns about twofold, about the Planning Commission's recommendations being seen as an addenda, but also the City Council having an opportunity to read a document without having to refer to those suggestions because of how scattered it could potentially be. And for what it's worth, there's a great deal of work that went into this, and it's absolutely stellar, but the referencing was rather difficult, and the City Council are busy people. So I do urge this commission to consider whether at this time or at a subsequent meeting in light of this, that we make those changes. However, one way to maybe rectify this now is that if the City Council is going to get this document in this condition, which is not bound, that in the document they can actually have slip-sheeted all of our language, so that you don't necessarily have to reprint it, but that every time they turn the page, they'll see our changes. So you could insert slip sheets, even if it's 30 suggestions. If this commission
Well,
approves
these were
to,
like this because they're not all done yet.
and that's that. Well,
So
that-
why would they
what I'm
even
saying,
print them?
Well,
So can
anyway,
I just
uh,
clarify, because attachment C, right, of tonight's report, these changes are already in the document. They're not undone. All these are in the document. We pulled them out because we had comments from the public before that people want to see what the changes are, and instead of redlining the document itself, which truly I can't emphasize, that takes a tremendous amount of time, and we're not
But
going to
it's
make
so
a hearing in
essential.
August if we have to do that. So we've made the sheet to identify to people, here are the changes, but the document that is here integrates everything in attachment C is in there. The only things that are not in the document, because these comments came in after we gave it to the commission, we didn't think it was fair to revise the document yet again, without anyone having seen it. That is the 10 addenda changes. That's the supplemental staff report. Those are the only changes that are not.
But Jing, if I
present in the
may
draft
interject for just a moment, if I may take Chair Fresco's comments a little bit further, if we want to get into the process and maybe thinking about changing the way we present information to council going forward, I'd argue that everything that was in what I'll call the blue line shouldn't have been printed up into the new document, that it should have been actually provided to us, because I actually don't agree with one single thing in the supplemental, and there's like 6 or 8 things that I just cannot support whatsoever in those blue lines. So to the extent that it's kind of like, what I'm saying is I get the feeling, and I share that feeling. I've been there before, I've been through the zoning ordinance and everything, and we all remember some opportunities we had to talk about that in the past, but it's kind of like saying, hey, so we heard from Harding, Larmore, Kozel, and Kutcher, and we are going to make all of these 150 changes. We've heard from the public, we've heard from Parks and Rec, and we're going to incorporate all of these changes in Planning Commission. We're really looking for you to just sanction them, but they're already in the book. It's actually a little bit demoralizing. And so
Let's take a step back. We are not saying that you have to adopt all of these. It's just that these attachments C highlights all of the changes. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. Here are all the changes that were made to the document since the last draft of it. We are not at all suggesting that you are forced to accept all of these by any means. If you don't find them acceptable, please please indicate that and tell us the changes that should be made. If you don't find that any of the changes in the addenda and the supplemental staff report are acceptable, please, again, you have the full flexibility to do that. We are not forcing anything or suggesting that you have to accept the changes. We were just trying to be transparent.
I hear you, and I
identifying
understand.
what the changes are.
Thank you for that explanation. However, then if, for example, in the blue line, and I'm just making this, let's say there's 90 changes that were already incorporated into the PDF. I mean, this thing's essentially a PDF. If we agree only with 1 out of the 99 things, does that mean that you'll change the PDF?
Yes.
That will go to council?
Yes.
So why wouldn't you change it to all of our suggestions, even if?
She's saying that she will.
Right, but the thing is, I made suggestions last time that I guess you guys didn't agree with, which I'm going to make again. And, they're not huge policy things, some of the things that preservation people made, and they didn't make it into the list. As far as, the planning, I take my copious notes. There are as many things in the planning commission suggested, because we're just writing letters like everybody else, we're rejected from letters from members of the public. And, I just feel like we're really.
So respectfully, those are part of the study session. Tonight is your formal recommendation. So again, if
so
you,
our
as
formal
agree-
recommendation, this will be edited, so what we recommend will go there, and if you guys think other things should happen or that an addendum is needed, it won't have, add this that the planning commission says, say.
I would
That's what I
suggest
would
that
suggest.
you have a document before you. You have a supplemental staff report with 10 changes, and as a commission, you're voting on a recommendation, whatever that is. That the changes are just highlighted here for you to understand what the difference was between the February version and the July version. So that you could track them easily. That was
Right.
what we were trying to do, so that you didn't have to.
Right, that's
look
not
back
the
and forth,
question.
right?
That's not the
So
the
I
issue.
think that whatever the motion is with whatever changes they are, that is the recommendation to the city council, and that's what tonight is about, is to make that formal recommendation to the council.
Can we, the rest of us talk about that?
Yeah.
I'm not next.
Oh, Amy is next.
I was going to say the same thing as Commissioner Lambert, which is, can we get to content, please?
Jason was next.
Then, yeah, well, Amy was next on the list and you were out of the room.
Okay.
So do you have something
The thing that I wanted to say is can we talk about content, please? Because I would like to move approval.
Yeah, I'm totally confused by the
Right,
process
well,
you're talking
I'm
about.
just not sure what this list of
Well,
things.
here's the thing.
Okay,
If
well, we'll say
if we adopt what staff is recommending, that's our recommendation. If we don't, it's not. I mean, it's pretty simple.
Right, okay, so I'm going to go through my list, and I'm going to say all the things that I want to say, and I'll get to find out it's a crapshoot if they'll end up in the document or not.
Well, if you'll get
That's basically what I'm
commission's,
learning.
buy-in.
All right, Jason, you're next.
I'm just going to comment on the question of form of our recommendation. You know, personally, I think that adding it as an errata sheet going to City Council draws attention to those particular changes that we're putting forward. These are the most recent changes that have been made to the document. So in generally speaking, the document as a whole has had more time for review, and considering the practical issues, I'm fine with how we've done it in the past where it's added on as an errata sheet.
All right, well, do you want to go through, are you ready to make your last comments?
Because I think you might have a longer list than I do, and mine's really short. I can make my comments now.
Go ahead.
And I think, Commissioner Parry, you do have a good point. Having them highlighted, I mean, I definitely share.
I just have a point of order.
You know what? Hold on a second. I have the floor.
It's a point of order. Don't you think it makes sense to make a motion and then add things and changes and what have you and have them go up or down?
Well, some people have already suggested a number of things, so.
And I just have 4 extras because you said we can come back to comment. So I'll make my quick comments and then we can, and then I'm happy to chime in when a motion is made to see if we can carry these as well. I have a question about edit number 50 in the blue line. I thought it was maybe a comment, but it's actually a question. The blue line edit number 50 says that any building or use within the beach overlay district currently in use as a recreational building or recreational area as of the date of the LCP certification shall not be removed. In the past, in other documents, when we've had statements like that, we've kind of said that it's okay to like back up the date instead of saying as of the date of adoption, but it's more like, you know, maybe January 1st, so that there aren't any necessarily, people don't rush to make some kind of a change or something while they're waiting for this to get certified. Does the staff see that as perhaps, having heard this suggestion now, a useful change, or do you stand by the way it is, and what's the difference really? And does it make any difference? I talked a little bit about this with Ms. Barrell today, and she said that it references mostly city properties. Is that definitely the case? I'm not second guessing you. I'm just seeing if anybody else has any other comments.
Are you talking about that as of the date of LCP certification versus something else?
Yeah.
I thought, Liz, you can remind me if I'm wrong, but I thought that date has to do that came about with discussions with coastal staff, wasn't it? They're not really into arbitrary reachbacks. They're pretty adamant about certification dates or the date of when the Coastal Act was enacted.
And you don't feel that's a risk or anything, like the way it's stated at this point? You don't see like there being any risk of losing any of these between now and the certification or anything like that?
I don't think so.
Okay. My next comment is regarding the supplemental page number 47, where language was added that says standards are based on analysis of a use's needs. For example, deed restricted affordable housing has fewer parking requirements than market rate housing. And obviously we know the background and where this came from, but I tried to kind of step back and pretend I was a person that doesn't necessarily know a lot of the background, and it almost sounds like, hey, if you've got tons of money, you get in your market rate type of a tenant, you are going to be able to have all this parking. But if you are low income, you're not going to have a lot of parking. And what I'm saying, I mean, it's obviously that's essentially what it's saying, but at the same time, I'm just arguing the way it's written sounds really discriminatory and odd. I don't know, maybe I'm reading it wrong.
That was made at Ms. Larmore's suggestion. It was something that she had requested just to make it clear that there could be reduced parking requirements for affordable housing. It was not intended to be discriminatory, so that was the intent.
I know, it just does, I mean, maybe I'm the only one that reads it as, for example, I mean, I would say whatever you just said sounded so much better. What did you just say? Was
well, it's just to allow for reduced parking requirements, and again, it aids in feasibility. So that was
I would
intent.
if it I'd be more comfortable if.
How about if we just delete then market rate housing? So it just says, for example, deed restricted affordable housing has fewer parking requirements.
That would be helpful. Or if staff wants to take a look at that, I'm not necessarily saying exactly what you should do. That's a decent suggestion, but you can look at it and perhaps knowing that my concern, maybe, at least.
It is something CCSM has constantly argued. They've always said that need the ability to reduce it. You're just arguing
I understand.
about the language.
I'm just actually talking about the language. I mean, maybe getting rid of then market rate housing will do.
So why don't you just flag it and ask
Yeah.
Liz to fix it up? You understand what we want, Liz.
Thanks. And then regarding 38 of the supplemental, the one that wants to add sub-area 8, including the south side of Pico Boulevard, is that essentially a typo to include that information, or is that like a policy? Is that like is that a substantive change?
Again, that was just something identified by Ms. Larmore, and so we thought it was just an inadvertent omission, and so they were just clarifying that to make it consistent. But
okay, because sub-area 8 includes it, and they're not saying to include it outside.
No, it was a mistake in the prior draft. It was just missed.
Okay.
Pico is that designation.
Okay, just clarifying. And then regarding comment number 84, which is about, can you just clarify for me what is meant by vantage point? I don't know, maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but they're suggesting the removal of that sentence that says the property on the northeast corner is designated ELS, whatever. A development agreement at this site should consider whether the vantage point view is affected. I thought it was appropriate, especially since it's using language such as consider, and I didn't see it to be offensive or directing anything in any way. Why are they recommending taking that out? Why are they? It's the supplemental we got, page number 84.
Okay. So just to clarify what is meant by the vantage point, this paragraph is on a page that illustrates the vantage point. So there's scenic corridors and there's vantage points. So vantage points are scenic viewpoints from one set place as opposed to like a whole long corridor. Mm-hmm. This language that was in part of that descriptive page for the Wilshire and 3rd Street vantage point refer to area that's, I have to open and look at the vantage points. We have like areas that are defined as not part of the view, and because this language described an area that was outside of what the view from the vantage point that was being protected was, they made an argument that, well, why are you describing this if it's not within the vantage point view shed? And so we said, you're right, we don't really need to have this language in here. If the commission wants to put the language back in, that again is your purview.
Okay, because that I think was actually one of the things that I perhaps brought up so I would prefer to leave it in. And thanks for letting me get more questions answered, and I'm ready to move to make suggestions and vote on suggestions.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to, I have a bunch of little things. For example, on page 24, last time and this
Commissioner
time.
Fresco, I apologize. Can we just summarize Commissioner Kennedy's changes? It's this change 84 that you want that language in, and the if staff could make an adjustment to the supplemental 47. It's just those two things, right? I don't know. I'm trying to use the same numbers that Commissioner Kennedy.
I have a list. If we get to the point where we're ready to make a
We're
motion
there.
and agree as a commission on items, I have a list, and those are 2 of them. Thank you.
We need to do that.
Yeah, I know, but I know, but
Can you tell us your
oh,
list
so
in
you
a
want me to go
concise
ahead?
way?
All right. Yes, I can do that. So I would recommend that we leave the language in the supplemental in 84 in. I would recommend that we change the language as suggested in the supplemental 47. In 78, I would add either sidewalks or just simply state public right-of-way so that it incorporates the sidewalks as well, and that it's clear and that there's nobody 10 years from now going to mistake it. And I've already asked earlier in the day to have staff take a look at supplemental 116 and 150 to look at the consistency between non-conforming buildings versus structures. We don't need to do anything about backing up that date. And then I have, in addition to those, that didn't sound good. No. That really didn't
There's some
sound.
construction going on.
Okay, that's definitely not thunder, but, okay. So then I would ask that we replace the word artificial with historic and cultural resources, which was something was brought up by the member of the public, and I'm sorry I don't have the item number on that.
Can we just make a note
Can I
about
interject?
that one? That's actually a language from the Coastal Act that's really not in our, we don't have flexibility to change that.
Thanks.
Okay, then I would
Chair, I'd like to move that motion up there, and if someone seconds it, then I will accept everything that Commissioner Kennedy has just put up to be incorporated in the document,
I second it.
and we can then move on
Okay.
to yours, because that
Okay.
way we've accepted. I see no problem with anything that you've said, and we can move on. And then we can come back for more comments. Because at least they would be
that's
adopted.
fine. I'll
Yeah, because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, that's all very good sense. Liz is going to do something about one of the things that you raised. You consider another list while we're listening
All
to
right.
Commissioner Fresco.
That's fine.
And we'll go from there, if that's all right with you.
All right, let's do
Because
it.
then we'll keep moving forward.
Okay.
I'll remember that. That's how you like to do things, Commissioner McKinnon.
Well, I'm listening
All
to
right,
this and I'm
okay,
thinking, we
stop
don't need to
talking
keep talking about it.
That's
Now I
fair
have to listen to Commissioner Fresco. Okay, right.
Get your pen. On page 24, last time we had discussed including all of the various landmarks. We just talk about the Louvre Hippodrome as if it's the only landmark on the oceanfront walk, and there's also the pier sign, the vernacular commercial buildings, and the Purser Apartments are all landmarks there. If we're going to describe that sub-area, we should include all the designated landmarks and include the note that there could be more in the future, that it is a fluid thing.
Chair, how many landmarks are there?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So I think we should accept that.
On page 25, I have a few places where basically I object to talking about projects in general that are not broken ground invested. I think pending projects like the Pier Bridge need to be very clearly talked about as pending or considering or proposed or not mentioned. Frankly, I think that even putting them in here as proposed kind of pushes them forward a little bit in a way that I'm personally not comfortable with, kind of like those not approved 130-foot buildings that no way can we be sure they're going to be approved if we put them in the downtown plan. So on pages 31 and 33, which are edits number 3 and 4, again, that's more lobbying. They talk specifically, oh no, wait. following the end of the first paragraph. Oh, yeah, that talks about the pending development agreements. Again, we don't have to talk about pending things. It's just city business. It doesn't belong in this plan. And then the other one has to do with the pending sports field. Council has approved it, but it certainly hasn't been approved by coastal yet. So putting it in our coastal plan as a pending thing, you can laugh all you want, but
What's the point of taking it out? I mean,
I care.
Okay, so Jing, you were just saying. No. Well, these are important things. So, Jing.
I just have to say that if you see language about the sports field, I just have to be very transparent from a staff perspective. We really will not have any flexibility to take that out. It was specifically put in there at the request of the community, and so I understand where you're coming from, and we can certainly look at the other pending ones, but with respect to the sports field, I don't think that we will be able to accommodate that change.
However, for purposes of making your recommendation, you can make your recommendation and then staff can decide how they're going to deal with that when they go to council.
So-
But your recommendation is whatever your recommendation
Staff is going to
is.
decide if they're going to take our recommendations and not.
No, I think the commission will decide, right, what to recommend, right? These aren't Commissioner Fresco's recommendations. These are the Planning Commission's recommendations.
So, Commissioner Fresco, before we go forward on those first bracket of 2 or 3, let's have a sense of the commission so that we can deal with these issues as we move forward. So, the first item that you brought up to us a minute ago was?
Including the landmarks.
And I accepted that as the mover of the motion.
fluid.
So the second thing?
Don't I have to accept it too?
Making references to pending development agreements.
I don't have a problem with including that. I don't see the downside.
I'm not comfortable with it.
Okay,
I
so
feel
we've
like
got
it's
one
not
either
relevant.
way. Let's have a sense. Commissioner Parry, do you care one way or the other?
I don't see that it only adds information to the current context. So I am fine with it in.
I agree with Commissioner Fresco.
So it's kind of 2-all at this stage. Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
This is regarding taking out development. I can't hear you.
Yes.
Reference-
You'll all have to put your microphones on so people can hear. We're in a discussion phase at the moment.
This is in regard to taking out development agreements. I think it's not a good idea to advance them by putting them in.
Are you saying taking out discussion of the development agreements or the word pending?
I don't think pending projects of any kind should be described in this document.
It's just fact sharing.
All right, so can I just have a...
This is a long-term document, and so our short-term pending things aren't relevant.
Could I ask both of the people who are advising us this evening whether it makes a difference with the Coastal Commission if we have it in or not?
No, it doesn't.
No, we're talking about background sections.
Right, okay.
It's
Right.
going to be
So,
taken out.
We should take them out.
You're proposing that they come out, and I think we've got a split commission on this, haven't we?
I don't know. What was it?
I don't care.
One,
This is not like
Okay, so
the
let's.
world.
So you're okay with them coming out?
Oh,
Move on
three.
to your next thing. I think if you're taking notes down there, Liz, or somebody, that can come out. You're taking the notes, great. What's your next thing, Commissioner Fresco?
The next one, shit, this is so hard to read, I'm sorry.
It's good. We've got the time. We'll work through it. We don't have all the time, but we.
Well,
It's only 10.
this is fucking.
It was the sports field, right? It was the pending
That
sports field?
died, right.
Or we decided not to put that in?
That sports field has to stay in.
Okay, great.
Otherwise, no one can leave the room this evening
Right.
due to the people outside. Yes.
You guys are cowards.
Okay.
I've been on the receiving end of that. So
Believe me, I've been living it for 2 years.
I think
I
it
don't
was.
understand, I can't even find the one. Anyway, whatever. Moving on, I'm going to skip that one. Oh, this was the thing about changing peer access and use study to a name that's not its proper name, so you can't find it on the internet. I think that would be really inappropriate. They didn't change the name of the study. We should call it its real name.
All right, Liz has got that one, and our colleague down here has noted that.
Page 59. Edit. Oh, well, this is, with completion of current projects underway, the early childhood lab school, multipurpose sports field, the civic center surface lot will be reduced. We don't know yet if it will be reduced, and we shouldn't put it in the description. So again, pending stuff established in the description of the plan, not cool.
Well, it's under construction.
The sports field is not under construction.
No,
It is
the
not a
child
vested
care.
project.
The child-
But the child care isn't taking out 800 parking spaces.
Oh,
This says
but-
with the completion of current projects.
But it hasn't begun yet.
Well,
It's not shovel ready.
So Liz, do you want to make a comment on that?
At this point, the sports field has received its entitlements from the
It has-
city.
but not from
It
the
hasn't got
Coastal
its-
Commission.
That's true, but anyway,
Right.
that's the state.
And so putting it in the coastal document like it's going to happen seems
It's
pretty
got
quirky
it's
to
got to
me.
be in there.
So I'm thinking the Commission is feeling that it should be in there, Commissioner Fresco. I just have a sense
Okay,
along
just
here.
move on.
Yes. And by the way, after Commissioner Fresco finishes her list, I'm going to ask everyone else for your lists and comments. And if you need a little more time at any stage, let me know,
94, George.
because I'll ask other
Oh,
people.
wait. I can't understand. Edit number, 91. You see, this is why I don't like this thing. It's just really hard to.
It is. It's a little.
Where is edit number 91? 84, 89, 93?
91 is one of those ones that kind of goes back and fits into, I'll tell you where it is. 91 is on the first page of the blue edits. It's after number 30.
That was really helpful.
I lived it in my research, so I know exactly where it is.
Okay, study Ophir front walk. Oh, okay. So there it was, I mean, that wasn't exactly what I had asked. I would prefer it was a view corridor. This is something I brought up in the thing when we were looking at the thing. Sorry, I'm confused what I'm looking at. But when I was saying that I couldn't understand the arrows and I wanted a description of what they were so that we understand that it's about looking down the actual walkway and not just the views to the ocean and the bluffs and the mountains. That's what that was.
So do you guys understand what Commissioner Fresco is talking about? And you can incorporate it? Great. Yes, thank you.
So then there was another thing about the plantings on Palisades Bluff, and they're eucalyptus, but they've been there for 80 years. And it didn't make it to the blue line, but then I noted that on page 10 of the Coastal Commission letter, they actually talk about those plants and that we should be careful not to disturb them, that they've become a nesting area. And I think that those plants are important, the eucalyptus, the bougainvillea. They've been there exactly that way, planted by the state in 1934, and I would like them to be recognized.
So are you advocating a paragraph recognising them in this document?
Yes, on
Can
page
you accommodate that?
63.
Is that a policy or is that just a description?
I think it's a description.
I think it's a
It says
descriptor.
Page 63.
I don't think that needs a policy, but it certainly is a descriptor
It's
which...
a description of the bluff, talking about the, they list all the plants that were, all the other plants that are native were also planted in 1934. And the only two that weren't native were the eucalyptus and the bougainvillea. The bougainvillea was a city flower.
Okay.
And the eucalyptus
So Commissioner
trees
Fresco, I actually
are-
appreciate your comments on that. Thank you. You don't need to worry that
Okay.
they're not
The
finding
other
fertile
thing
ground.
was, we talked about dune restoration on the North Beach, and we talked about how that's not a restoration. We are creating dunes on the North Beach because it doesn't naturally have them and never did, and that we are creating safe habitats for species by creating dunes. So I would like to see that change.
So I think that's a semantic change that can be accommodated by you guys, if you wouldn't mind. It might be a couple of lines.
What page, I'm sorry?
63. On page 99. Sorry. I can't remember what they all are.
page 99 in the blue line is also edit number 39 and 40.
No, this is edit 41, where new development projects may provide on-site parking. Oh, that one Paula fixed. That didn't make sense. Oh, and then, there's another one. Oh, this one didn't make any sense either, because the blue lines say G48 : G49 ICOL.
So that's a
It just doesn't.
language word thing that needs to be fixed up.
Well, it's actually a huge typo where the change was supposed to be, and I don't know.
That typo is the word I was looking for, so maybe you guys can fix that up.
I don't know what it's supposed to be, but I guess we're.
Well, if it's
okay.
meaningless, let's take it out or fix it up, okay?
There's some change there.
That's edit number 45.
Right. So you guys have got that? Great.
On page. Oh, this is the coastal trail views. So instead of making a view corridor of the trail, they just added views of the bluff to the features of the trail. But one of the things that I was really concerned about there is that it be improved, and that things like supports for bridges be painted to blend in with the bluffs, that there not be antennas or that don't need to be there, or that can be installed in a way that doesn't, it's just so cluttered, it looks terrible on the...
So that's a twofold thing. It's not just some words, it's also a descriptor of almost a minimalist approach to...
Or a compatible approach. I mean,
Yes.
obviously utilities, signage, beach amenities, pathways, wires...
And I think I would accept that, because that's what I was driving at when we were talking about the pier with Ken earlier on, which is elevating what we're trying to do in our part of the coastal
Right.
area.
I mean,
so if you can accommodate that in your descriptor of it, it'd be good. Am I sensing a yes?
I think you're sensing a little confusion, sorry. Is this in the description, or are you talking about a policy?
In policy, let's see, page 100, in my book, I don't know what page.
I think it's 102, or policy 31.
Well, on their book.
So I think, Liz, there's going to be two parts to it. There's a descriptor of why we want something to happen, and then
No.
Well, there is.
Objectives shall the California Coastal Trail shall be designed
That's
and
32A.
implemented to achieve the following objectives: that clutter will created by utilities, signage, beach amenities, pathways, wires, and other utilitarian objects be added in a way to avoid cluttering the view. Yes. So things should be together, they should be designed in a way that blends in, to be painted the color of the sand if they can be. It needs to just not look so trashy even when there's not trash.
Okay, but are you talking about the trail itself, or are you talking about the views from the trail?
The views from the trail. You agreed to add a thing about that it's maximum ocean views and scenic coastal views and views of the Palisades Bluff. And then we're supposed to design to maintain those things and make them better also and improve them. That's the whole idea, right? And that's why they have all of these
So
things.
if I understand correctly, so it's 31A Romanet 5, is that you want to add to Romanet 5 because it's associated with
It's 32A, actually.
I think it's...
in our book, it's 32.
Yes. Liz already added that in the new book.
Right. Maximize ocean views, scenic coastal vistas, and views of Palisades Bluffs. But it sounds like what you're talking about is you'd like the view of the Palisades Bluff itself to be better.
Well, this is why I wanted it to be a view corridor and not this. So I'm trying to work with what you suggested.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. I'm just really impatient. I'm sorry.
I know. So let's all just take a little chill moment here and calm down. We're all working in the same direction. So I think what Commissioner Fresco is saying, there's a lot of clutter and other things that are impeding
Right.
the
The
views
reason-
and the trail itself, in my view.
Uh-huh.
Can we craft language that deals with that?
Um,
The actual
y-
answer is yes, you
yes,
can.
you can craft
Right.
language that deals with that, whether it fits into this policy or not.
Or
I
it
would
should
need
be
a
an
little more time
actual-
to think. And I'm not sure it would fit anyway for if you called it a view corridor. It's the same, you'd have the same dilemma that what's existing now, you can't declare it a view corridor and then say, well, what's existing now suddenly has to change. You need other policies to get that happening.
Right, well,
And I'm
in-
not sure this is the right one, but there could be something. I just
Well,
don't
in
know.
the view corridors, it says that we're supposed to, as we move forward, improve them and remove things that are not right. So things at the beach
So
are constantly changing.
I'm hearing Commissioner Fresco advocate something that I actually think is pretty important, and I get the sense from the rest of the Commission. Could you look at accommodating what she has just put forward? Yes.
Yes, I just can't say right now on the dais.
No,
what's the
I
best way
understand
to
that,
do
but if you
that.
could do that, that would be great.
I'm
Thank
sure
you.
you can find the very best way.
No, I think there's a step forward, and I'm got great confidence that you can take that.
Uh-huh.
Commissioner Fresco, your next point.
It says here, I wrote perhaps for IP, but it says that projections beyond height limits may be allowed on page 146. That was a change that you made, and I thought maybe in the IP, or maybe it goes here, that there would be a condition that things that stick up above the limit of the height of a building don't clutter the view of the bluff again. So we make sure that rooftop antennas and HVAC and all that kind of stuff don't make the bluff look worse. And of course, can never go above the height of the bluff.
When you say page 146, are you talking about the plan, or what do you?
Well, it's
Page
actually, I think.
146, I'm talking about the plan in this book.
It's page 146 in the earlier draft, and it's page
Edit number
150
81 on this thing.
and it's 51 in the July draft. And I think what chairperson's actually saying is important.
Commissioner
because
Kennedy, can I
we're
say
saying
you
that-
are awesome. You are on top of this beyond anybody I've ever
I
seen.
could never.
I can
just
take disorder
could
and
not
make it
get on
ordered,
top of this
but
with all
I'm
of these
sensing that.
details. You know, I like to be on top of all the details.
And I think you
was
are too. Okay.
challenged.
Thank you for that
Yes.
suggestion, Commissioner
So
Fresco.
then
That's a
I
good
had a
one.
note that the task force on the environment brought up the idea of plastics. And the idea that nothing made of plastic be sold at the beach sounded like a really cool idea to me. And like straws and everything just be made of paper, things that will dissolve. And I don't know if that's something that
So,
goes in
Commissioner
here
Fresco,
somewhere.
I'd say that's an incredibly cool idea. I don't think that that's a policy that we can do, but let's
Not
put it
right
on our
now.
list of things that we should tackle.
Yeah, I just was really intrigued when I read their
I
letter.
don't think intrigued. I think we should be doing that.
Yes.
That's just not part of what we can do tonight.
Agree.
But we can do it in the IP, right?
Yeah, Commissioner Fresco, keep moving.
Okay, so then in the addendum, okay, we're almost there, guys.
No, just calm. It's all good.
I lost my addendum.
Here it is.
See, you keep messing with
I
my
know, I've neatened it up.
Number 3, I just have more of a grammatical problem. Streets and alleys, we were going to change to right-of-way, but ocean views for streets and alleys, of course, doesn't make any sense. Through, along.
Can I add something to that? East-west right-of-ways?
It's not always east-west. There's a view corridor. Oh, on Ocean Avenue.
To Ocean Avenue, yeah.
Yeah, never mind.
And we've
Is that
also
okay
got
with
the
you?
sidewalks of Commissioner
Yeah,
Kennedy.
east-west
that's
right
coming
of
to
way.
us.
Yes, thank you. Wasn't going to let that one go. That's for sure.
I didn't want to delete in number 4, page 84, I didn't want to delete that either, that Jennifer didn't want to delete. And I would love to have a copy of the current downtown plan, since I clearly don't have one. And
Those ones we accepted
even though I
already.
understand that these are the maximum most, I think it would be really important to say, with all bonuses that apply, or with everything applied that can be, with all conditions met, or something, just to qualify that this is the absolute most if you jump through every hoop.
So Liz, I think you need to footnote it. I think the reaction of Commissioner Kennedy and Commissioner Fresco is a reasonable one. on that.
And then Ken Kutcher, about removing parking from pier, yes. Giant Public Works project, I had that same reaction, since I'm concerned about even the tiny Public Works
So,
project.
Commissioner Fresco, could you clarify those last 2 points?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going faster because we've already discussed them.
Okay.
He brought up about policy 18.
But what did you want to do about that?
I was supporting Ken Kutcher's
Okay.
language.
Okay, so
You
we
want me
don't
to
need to do
find it?
anything. No, it's fine. I've got that.
Can we
discuss that though?
Yes.
What is it?
Okay, well, I have to find this.
It was about
What was the thrust of it?
So-
the
Yeah. So I think what we're trying to do here is get it all down, agree to the things we can agree to, and then
Thank you, Chair.
identify the issues that need to be discussed. And we will have that discussion. So the Kutcher one is obviously important. What else, Commissioner Fresco?
And then the Public Works one policy,
Yeah. Okay.
one, old book 141, new book 143, old page 131.
Right. And do you have anything else on your list?
Can you just state again, Commissioner Fresco, what your idea was regarding 143?
That wasn't my idea, that was Ken Kutcher's idea.
Okay, so
And his idea was, can you just
About the Public Works project, about not putting in language that Public Works, that projects that are required for life or health or whatever.
Okay, so
be-
leaving it out, actually.
Right, because obviously
that.
if they're required for health and safety, they're going to happen, and we don't need to
I support
exempt
that.
them from all our rules.
So my sense is the Commission agrees with you on that. I think most of the things that you've brought up, we've discussed, we've either rejected them or there's some word changes. You had an issue about Ken raising parking on the pier. Did you want to speak to that?
He said something about policy 18, which unfortunately I can't remember off the top of my head.
Look in your book.
I'm trying to remember what he said about
I
it.
just want to point out that my goal with the public safety one was to try and come up with language to narrow it, but not to eliminate it.
Mm-hmm. So what was your suggestion, Commissioner Anderson, then on narrowing it?
I'm trying to find where it's highlighted. Sorry.
Let's make the motion first.
The motion's made, I think.
Yeah, the
right?
motion's made.
No, you're making
Not
it right
technically not.
No, we're adding to it. He and I made it.
Oh, that's, well.
I'm just saying, let's figure out what the motion is in its entirety, and if
Yeah.
there are particular issues that another commissioner would like to raise to modify it or suggest an alternative, let's do that out once we have it all together.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting.
18, what he suggested is to add, the city shall explore opportunities for converting the existing pier parking to visitor serving uses in conjunction with ensuring that the pier shall blah, blah, blah.
That's not policy 18 then.
That's the sentence, the language
Well-
that Ken Kutcher suggested adding to the beginning of policy 18.
And you're suggesting we should incorporate that.
I think it's a fine idea.
But this is
And-
about the SWIP.
I agree.
And Commissioner Kennedy, I think, thinks it's a good idea. And
He said it's
yes,
policy.
so there's
18 years
four of
ago.
us.
No, I'm not. This is the most current book.
Okay, so Commissioner Fresco, have you finished with your
It's a new change as of today.
chaps? Commissioner Fresco, I think you've finished with all the things you wanted to raise. Some of them have been rejected, some of them have been incorporated. As the mover of the motion, I have accepted the ones that need to be incorporated, and I think our colleagues down here have got it. Is there anything commissioners along here would like to take issue with or raise?
Yes.
Okay, hold on a second. I'll go to Jason first because he, and then I'll.
Leslie's next
Okay,
on the
Leslie.
line.
All right. No.
Who's chair?
No,
I
no.
just couldn't do all that and
Yeah,
be
yeah.
chair at the same time.
Mine are editorial and they're from the book.
Mhm.
Because I'm fine with your addendum and the changes you've made. On page 151 on table 3,
Oh, okay.
I believe that you have the wrong height for R1. You have it as 35 feet. I don't know where there's a single-family district that has a 35-foot height limit.
Okay, so can you just raise that, and you guys need to
just
check
an
that?
editorial.
Noma?
No, that's fine. You've identified it, so
Right,
they
it's
need
not
to look at.
35 feet.
Yep. Second point.
Actually, it is.
It's in NOMA.
It's a NOMA, yeah.
No, it's 32 feet, and they're lowering it to 28 in the IZO.
No, in the permanent ordinance, it's.
No, in the permanent ordinance, it's 32. Trust me.
Can we just say
Okay.
whatever the correct
Whatever
height
it
is?
is.
Whatever it is.
We will
Yeah.
correct.
No, it's not. And then I already told you on page 146, in the single family, you should add the early childhood education facilities or whatever they're called.
And I think Liz caught that earlier on. Thank you.
Okay, then on page 183.
Yep.
What am I? Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's policy 183. And that's on page 150. I was just, this is just a thing of mine. On 183, it says shall allow the development of accessory dwelling units, put encourage. Because I think that's more consistent with state law.
Hold on a minute. So let's run along the commission.
I have the wrong book, so
Are
I don't
people,
know what page.
hold on. So are people
Page 150.
in favour of encourage instead of shall?
In the old book,
Hmm.
it's page 145, number 180.
Well, I have the
You
most.
have the, well,
In the
nobody
new
else has
book.
that.
No one else has the current copy?
No.
Yeah, we all have the current copy, because the
We
current
just
copy
got
is
it
what we got
today, but
tonight.
It's like paper clipped
so.
together.
I didn't.
So-
That explains it.
So, Commissioners, the issue is actually not the page number, it's whether the word shall changes to encourage.
Yes, allow to encourage.
Right, I'll just
Allow.
allow to encourage.
It's the accessory dwelling unit
Right.
part of it.
You know, and that's it.
Yes. So, does the Commission want to encourage or to allow?
We're
Commissioner Parry?
encouraging. We're
Encourage. Yeah.
We're encouraging.
I think there's enough support for encourage. Encourage replaces shall. Okay. Commissioner Kennedy, did you have any other points?
I'm okay with allow, but I'm not going to fight it if
Mhm.
obviously if the majority of the commission thinks otherwise.
I'm going to move to Commissioner Fonda Bernardi.
Yeah, I just have 3 points that were actually made by Carol Lemline in the section regarding landmarks.
Right.
That they should mention Carousel Park, which it may be a future.
That's
Wait.
proposed for landmark.
Yeah.
So your point being?
That is not referred to as a potential landmark.
I see.
In the.
Well, she said that it should also not be just mentioned as a kid's playground and that it's actually
Yeah.
a multifaceted
Okay.
resource.
So Planning Department, Liz, can you speak to that, please?
Well, doesn't this get back to the pending question
Yeah,
you had
it's
before?
it's part of the pending question, so it's the
So if you're
quality.
if you're eliminating pending, I don't know.
Okay, leave it
Well,
out there.
if we really are, if we're going to only leave in the pending things we're afraid to take out, then you should be scared to take this out.
Okay. So thank you for that
I'm not
editorial.
I have a question of
No,
staff,
no one's scared here. So perhaps the wider point is that it's not a kid's playground, and perhaps you can
Right.
alter the language on that and then
Right.
put a
There
full
should
stop.
also be a reference to the rehab of the Civic Center.
Oh, yes.
Which is an important
Right.
ingredient.
Yeah, and I didn't get a
No,
chance
it's
to
in the
reply to
Civic
that,
Center
but there's
plan.
2 places where the Civic Center is mentioned. It's on page, I think,
Yeah, I didn't
31, and it's
actually
on page
have that.
59. So the references that they said weren't in there here are in here.
As a rehab building, or as a.
Well, as a project that is being, it's
That's-
underway to be revitalized or whatever.
Oh, okay.
It's in 2 places.
It is mentioned as an element of the Civic Center specific plan.
So is the Force Center.
Yeah, and it's also mentioned on page 59.
Perhaps,
Okay.
Liz,
So if it's in those 2 places, it's
In
fine
which it
with
says
me.
that it's currently closed, the city is planning for its revival in future years, and this will also
all
enhance
right.
the civic
So
center.
Commissioner Mario thinks it's fine with him in those 2 places, but
Okay.
if it could work in somewhere else, that would not upset anybody on this commission.
And then
Okay.
the last comment that Carol made was regarding the 87 landmarks, and it should just be 87 and counting.
Right.
So that was it.
And what I didn't understand about that was whether or not she wanted them all chapter and verse identified.
No. She
But just a numerical count put in there. So if you guys could catch that, that would be great.
Yeah.
Commissioner Anderson, did you have some things that you wanted to raise or incorporate? And I'll come back to you, Commissioner Kennedy.
Can I just comment on something that's already been
Please.
identified?
Yeah.
So the concern about the public works projects required for public health and safety. So I guess I just reread that phrase, which is part of a long sentence, where the beginning of that sentence, and I'm sure I'm going to get this a little bit off, it basically establishes like design objectives, right? So maybe if we could add language that says, provided that the provided public works projects require for public health and safety shall be accommodated, like if they meet the design objectives, right? Because I will say, you guys, that the way that it's worded now, it does make it sound like they don't have to comply. And Liz, I heard you say that they do need to comply. So if there's maybe a way to clarify that they don't, these public work projects don't have carte blanche. We want to accommodate them, but we want to accommodate them in a way that meets those criteria or those objectives that are described at the beginning of the sentence, right?
Okay.
Does that reach where the other members of the commission feel it should? I mean, I think the concern that I had at one stage was there's some discussion about a second bridge going in on the pier, but it wouldn't come to the Planning Commission, and to me that was no public review at all. And I think that we all want public review of some of these things, and we certainly are not happy with, oh, well, we just have to put in a desal plant because that's what is required now, and that's it. So if what Commissioner Anderson suggested gets close to it, that would be useful. Can you accommodate that?
Yeah, we can
Okay,
adjust
great.
the language to accommodate
That's fine.
that.
I'm going to go to Commissioner Parry and come back to you, Commissioner Kennedy. Commissioner Parry, do you have some issues? And by the way, once we finish the detail, let's have a short discussion across the breadth of this before we take the vote.
No, I don't have anything to add to things that have already been raised. I do want to make sure it's kind of a challenge to track all of the bits to this motion. Did the rebuild modification of that language make it into what we have so far? And if not, let's put it in.
It did, didn't it, Liz?
The rebuild modification.
The Larimore suggested language for if there's a non-conforming or there's
legal
a use
non-conforming.
that is
That use
destroyed and it's in a hazardous
If it meets
area.
the compliance standards.
Exactly.
Yes,
I think we all agreed that was
in the
there.
supplemental.
Yes.
That was in
Yeah.
Well, the compliance of that time.
It was addressed in the supplemental.
Right.
But then Paula Larimore suggested different language, and I'm not sure.
To make sure the
Oh.
uses could also be reestablished. I think that was the difference.
No,
Do
actually,
I
it
have
was
the
a
floor?
clarification
Right.
about the triggers.
It was a clarification.
the trigger
On
language.
a sea level rise triggers.
Sorry.
Right.
Oh, right.
Right, that
Right,
was the
and
email.
that's
today.
what the compliance of that moment meant. So as
And
long as
we
that made it in.
said that, yeah, we said that
That's fine.
that was
You were fine
another
with that at
different
that
way
time.
to say it.
That
That
was
was
some
fine with
hours
us,
ago.
and if you want to recommend it, then we're in.
Yeah,
Okay,
we
so
were
I'm
in.
going to ask that it
Okay.
be included.
And I accept that. So, okay, Commissioner Kennedy. Last detailed comments before we go to more general discussion.
Yeah, I just.
Or you can go just straight to general discussion. Whatever you choose.
Okay, well, actually, I have a question first, and it might be a little bit out there, so I apologize for having a really out there question, but I just feel like I need to ask all of my questions. Earlier in the evening, I commented about what would happen if we changed, one of our other plans or codes, and then we wanted to make it consistent in the procedures that it would take to make that happen in the LCP and perhaps even the IP once it's adopted. But how does staff feel about, I hate to say chances because it's speculation, I'm not really talking about speculation, but based on your professional review of everything, how likely is it that someone is going to say once this is either approved by council, or if it does get, or is certified by Coastal Commission, that we'll see a flurry of text amendments asking to update our policies and our other documents to reflect what's in here? Are you confident that everything is consistent and on the level so that we won't be actually seeing that? I mean, I know that might sound like paranoid.
I don't think that's out there. I think that's a good
Okay.
point. Ching.
Yeah, I mean, I think really probably the inverse is the greater concern, because this, the LUP is consistent with all of our adopted documents. It's not creating new policy or anything like that. We've been very clear about that since the beginning. You are correct, that in the future that, so we've tried to create that balance with the LUP to not get to a level of specificity where we have to amend it every time we amend, the zoning ordinance, what have you. When we get into an adopted implementation plan, that's where
right.
You are going to, like, every time you change the zoning ordinance, you have to go back and change the other thing. And we really kind of worked with the Coastal Commission staff to try and pull back from that level of specificity, because at some point, they wanted us to put all our definitions in the zoning ordinance in here. We're like, that's insane. Every time we change a definition in the zoning ordinance, we'd have to go back in here and do that. That didn't make any sense. So,
although that is how there was one of these blue line changes.
Yeah.
Did actually, you're recommending that, and that's what's.
I mean, like there's some things that can't be avoided, like the definition of demolition. We kind of vehemently oppose doing that because it's something that has a life of its own, kind of, but it's in there, and so that is an example of if we were to change it in the zoning ordinance, it would necessitate an LUP amendment to make it consistent with what we've done in the rest of the city.
So I get the feeling, Commissioner Kennedy, that the DAS wants to make a comment.
Yeah, Melis has a.
And I also wanted to make a comment too.
Yes.
I just want to say while it is kind of seems like a daunting process to go get an amendment for each of these things, it's very common. And if you look at any Coastal Commission staff agenda, you'll see at least one, but most likely several amendments, cities coming for amendments to their IPs. And when it's small things, it's usually not a big deal because like Liz is doing now, you do it in coordination with them and then you go, and it's usually pretty quick. So that process is nothing similar to the process that you're doing right now, unless it's a huge, really major change amendment. So I wouldn't get too stuck on that because it's a very common thing that cities do all the time.
However,
thank you. Now, in the
it
reverse,
does possibly encroach into local control because there are sometimes unintended consequences of adopting a plan specifically the way the coastal staff wants us to adopt it. It's a lot more specific than perhaps it should be because it should be just a policy document. Right. And so just like with the zoning code update where we've had several updates, even though I think we've tried very hard to maintain consistency, the reality is that the land use plan is kind of a horizontal equivalent to a general plan, and therefore it does take precedence over conflicting requirements. So therefore, if there are any unintended inconsistencies, it could require or cause somebody to challenge something based upon inconsistency with the land use plan. So it is somewhat of taking a step towards less control because there are more state-directed policy objectives that
I understand
we haven't
that
had to deal with.
That's one of the things. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's one of the things that Liz explained to me earlier today. Was I got the full scope of the actual lack of control aspect of it. So in light of the fact that it's possible that we could see some requests in the future for amendments to our other plans and codes as a result of what's in here, although unlikely, still theoretically possible. Is it possible for the staff to explain, or at least state on the record that in light of the fact that one is supposed to be looking at the other codes and plans first before moving to this one, that should the opportunity arise for someone to say, hey, I would like to now change like the downtown plan or some code to reflect what's in this document, that because in light of the fact that the way you use these documents is the other thing comes first, that at least it gets a heightened level of scrutiny, that such a change would require such a heightened level of scrutiny. Or that, I mean, I would love to say you can prevent it. If somebody, like for example, the city council says, hey, this is a great document, I approve. Coastal Commission says, yeah, this is everything we've been waiting for our entire lives. And then all of a sudden, the next meeting at the Planning Commission, it's like a text amendment for 30 things to the downtown plan because somebody's looking to make some policy changes consistent with this document. I am worried about that. To me, everything looks really good so far. We've all reviewed it. So many eyes are on it. But I imagine something like that will happen. And all I'm saying is that are we prepared to be able to say, or that would be a discretionary action anyway, right?
Well,
Changes
I share
like that,
your
I guess it would
overall
be.
concern.
Yeah.
However, it is really hard to answer your question
it's
and to give you the assurance that you are seeking because, obviously we believe we are consistent
enough.
and we've
Okay.
done our best. And again, this is unintended consequences. And so
All right.
just with the zoning code update, the same may happen here, in which case we'd have to go through the process of
All right, so then I'll reiterate it again, and then I'll shut up, is that as this planning commission goes forward, there's going to be members who come and go, there's going to be plans that come and go, and lots of things that come and go. But because we were told here this evening that the way these documents are supposed to be used in conjunction with each other is that people look at the other documents first, and then if it's also in this zone, you take a look at this document, and then you can proceed, and you need to get your permits if necessary and whatnot, that at least going forward, should somebody want to make changes to some other codes or plans as a result of this document, that we look and say, because the way that they're used, it might not be necessary. Does that make sense?
Okay. I think we are ready to discuss your motion.
Yes, so as the mover of the motion, I'd just like to be short about it, that we've had a series of comments and suggestions and things to knock out. We've accepted some of them, we've knocked some of them else out. It's up to you now to summarise those, and I would hope before this moves forward to the City Council that we all receive a chapter and verse detailed exposition of it. And we'll come back to this in a second. So just in terms of me moving the motion, I think what we're doing tonight has got three elements. One, we're preserving access to the beach, which is the single most important thing that can happen on the coast in California. I come from a country where everybody has access to the beach all the time. It's not like the East Coast where you sell off bits of the beach. And the moves up and down the coast of California to restrict access to people or close are just disastrous. And what we are stewards of this beach, and it's really important that we get it right. So the level of detail and the work that's gone into it, it won't be 100% correct, but I do share Commissioner Fresco's passion about this, and I'm actually very happy that she showed it to everybody that we are here fighting every line and every aspect of it because we believe in what we're doing here tonight. And yet some of what we're doing is managing change, because nothing is ever the same today as it will be in 5 years or 10 years. So there is a change that's coming, and we know that we have to manage that change. And I, for one, don't want 100, 200, 300-foot towers to line Ocean Avenue. That's not going to happen. And some part of what we're doing is conserving what we've put together here for all time. And so it's a really important document, and we have fought over it and we've argued, and I think we've got to a good place here this evening. It won't be a perfect place. Let's not let that stand in the way. Are there some things that you want to feed back to us before the rest of the Commission offers their thoughts about where we should go?
Well, so Carrie has been writing down...
Diligently?
Okay. Carrie's been writing down all of the changes that the Planning Commission has just agreed to,
Yeah.
and so we thought is that he would read back to see.
I don't think that's necessary. I think, yes, but yes, but you're also going to send it out to us in an email very shortly, and if there's some objections...
I think, well, I would like a revision of this, and you can send it to us, and we can just check for ourselves before it goes to council and make sure that it's the document that we wanted to send to council. That's what I think we should do.
And I would be fine with that. And
so final draft July will become final draft August.
I thought we agreed we were okay with an errata sheet.
I still don't, I'm still not okay with it, so.
Well, I'm not sure it's just up to us, right? Because it's also about staff capacity.
So you would go with an errata sheet?
Yeah.
Commissioner Fondabonati, an errata sheet? What do you think, Commissioner Kennedy?
Both.
think
Because I
both.
actually think that Commissioner Perry had a good point, that calling out the work that we've done here tonight is really important, because I'm
Just
willing
an
to bet
answer, please.
$7 that no one's watching this meeting.
So 2-1.
So-
Okay, so
I'm fine with it because I think the errata sheet will point out what we did tonight. That's the
okay,
whole point of the errata sheet.
3-2. Commissioner Perry?
Yeah, I agree with me.
Okay. I bet that happens a lot in your house, actually. So I think we will have an errata sheet because the sense of the Commission is that, and you've obviously raised the issue about your concern over the overall document. What I sense is there'll be an errata sheet, it'll go to the City Council, and they'll do the final. And if there are big issues that you feel, bring us all into the discussion.
Commissioner McKinnon, though, I just want to, I mean, the staff did offer, at least it sounded like they offered, and I could have misunderstood, but it sounded like they were willing to modify the PDF where possible or something. I mean, maybe I misunderstood, and that.
Okay, so let's ask Jim.
I thought we were talking about the table. When you were talking about the changing the PDF, I thought you were talking about the addenda, like the table of changes, not the actual document.
I see.
Okay, so you'll have a document, and then you'll have this errata, and it will be clear that this is the Planning Commission's decisions on this night that we want incorporated into this document.
Yes.
That it stands.
Right.
And you may do something else on whatever, but at least people
There
will
would
see
be a
this.
very clear record as to exactly what.
Excellent.
Motion.
And I know that won't satisfy
So we will
Commissioner
have to
Fresco.
modify the reso slightly, just to reflect that, because of what it says is that it's the plan that's presented to the Planning Commission, and that is not the case. So it would be minor to just say that it's the plan with the errata sheet as an attachment.
So that's what I would move, and I guess that's what the second would move to.
It seems like all I'm going to get.
All right.
Well,
So, Commissioner
you
Kennedy.
know, I support you and others, actually. I think that the conversation at a different time might be worth having about the way we present stuff, but I'm with you, Chair.
And
I'm
I
with
do
you,
think
Chair.
I think the Commissioner, the sense of the Commission, again, Commissioner Fresco, you touched on a very important nerve, is absolutely what Commissioner Kennedy and Fresco have raised so passionately again this evening, how we present things to the City Council. So I've made my comments. I guess the second, do you wish to? You're fine. Are there other comments members of the Commission want to make before we move? Commissioner Fresco.
I think we should vote.
Okay. And this is the motion as amended, your suggested amendment to include the errata. Fine. With the changes that you guys have got that you're going to circulate to us tomorrow?
Sure.
I'm joking. But
No, we can,
sure.
we can give it to you tomorrow. We have it all here, so.
So I think that would be a good idea while it's fresh in people's minds.
Good.
Okay. Jean.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Yes.
Commissioner Lambert?
Yes.
Commissioner McKinnon?
Yes.
Commissioner Perry?
Yes.
Chair Fresco?
Yes. All right. I think we've done it. So I've lost my agenda in all of those papers, but I think
I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure serving you, and
yes.
hopefully I will have the opportunity to work further with you in some of the development agreements that are moving forward. And so if you ever want to contact me for any reason, feel free to do that. Pick my brain.
I would like you to continue to read ancient legal documents for me, if that's okay.
I'd like to say thank you. I don't particularly think I know Heidi very well, but and we see with different plans, different plan leaders in this department come before us on an inconsistent basis, whereas we see you on a regular basis and rely on all that you provide to us, and I'm very thankful for your work and your help with the Commission. Thank you.
And I think we all second that, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Where are the cupcakes?
No, come on. Well, she's not leaving the city.
Unfortunately, I'm not retiring, so.
Right.
So before we adjourn, we have one more item of public comment from Mr. Rubin.
Thank you very, very much, Chair Fresco, city staff, commissioners. I'm tired.
So are we.
So I can imagine how tired you must be doing all the work here.
Liz,
and
don't go.
city staff, but I think this is very important. I wanted to put it under agenda item number 9, if it was appropriate that I was able to speak on that for future agenda items. Because it's something that, even though it'll take time, and as tired as you are, it's going to probably be a, oh my gosh. But after we're done, a long process with a lot of things, we see it's beneficial to the city. And that's the issue of agendizing a topic for discussion and hopeful recommendation for support for an ordinance that will protect trees on private property. It'll be on the Environmental Task Force agenda, I think in a positive way. It was going to be heard a few days ago, but they didn't have a quorum. It was already agendized, and I was at the Urban Forest Task Force meeting earlier today at the library, and that'll be on the next agenda. But it's important that you guys do it. And I think you probably already know that, because in other cities, it's the planning department that implements this kind of thing. And it's something that'll be a real asset to the community. And I know that there'll be divisions, but if we work in a good way, this will benefit homeowners and developers and the entire community, and certainly our trees, and give a real predictable thing for people to move forward with some flexibility that'll be done in a fair way to benefit everyone. And it's going to take time to iron it all out. We're not just going to imitate, I wouldn't think, other cities, but we certainly can learn from what they've done, because we're kind of innovators and not just imitators, so we'll tailor it to ourselves. But it's something that's long overdue and was actually discussed 10 years ago at the Urban Forest Task Force. But they were so busy then, and rightfully so, addressing the trees on public property, that this issue was put off. Some people disagreed, even people on the task force. I personally feel that I understood that we had a task to deal with trees on public property, but now's the time to do it. And the Planning Commission, certainly I would hope that you would agendize it for a discussion at your next meeting. That's it.
So, Jerry, is this the latest you've ever been out? I've never seen you here at 10:53 in the evening.
I did it for spite. If you guys are going to do it, I'm going to stay up too.
Well,
and I really admire the way you went through this. I really do. All of you helping here to bring it together, because it is so important.
Thank you. So, of course, we do have our next item is future agenda items. Does anybody have anything to offer?
Trees on private property.
Is that what you would like?
I think that is actually a really important issue. We have 33,000 public trees. We have so many more in private hands, and yet they keep getting chopped down.
Yeah, maybe we
actually
could come in August 1st and discuss it.
Interesting idea, but thank you.
Just saying. All right. Anything else? You have another agenda item?
Well, actually, I sent an email to Mr. Martin this week to try to add something that may be put on the August 15th agenda regarding corporate housing, because I may have found a discrepancy between an ordinance and the code, the way we updated it in the ZOU. And so I'd like to bring it to the commission. And yeah.
Okay.
So I've already emailed it, but I'm just letting you know that I did.
I'm sorry, can you describe the discrepancy just briefly? Or maybe I missed something you said.
That's
I
okay.
didn't get the subject matter.
The item I'm suggesting is that we have a discussion of corporate housing, the way it's been drafted in our zoning ordinance and the way it is permitted in our city, or rather prohibited, and in conjunction with some things that we've seen lately with regard to that type of housing, possibly hiding in plain sight. Perhaps and I know from speaking with the Rent Control Board, who also has it on their agenda for August 9th, they've been dealing with the issue as well, and their counsel recently explained to the Rent Board that it's a land use issue, and so I'm doing my part to create a dialogue on the issue. Thanks.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? Oh, wait, sorry, Mario.
Our mission statement, a new agenda item.
Oh, yeah. Feedback from staff, please. We have a draft. All right, beautiful. Okay. Motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.